Venus is not behaving like a planet that remembers its past. It turns the wrong way. It breathes the wrong air. It holds a surface too young for a world born beside Earth. And tonight, in this quiet space, we are going to drift into the possibility that Venus is not only strange, it may be a world whose very memory has slipped, folded, or been overwritten. You are listening to Whispers of the Universe. If you are gentle enough to offer a small sign of support, even the faintest light you leave behind helps this place stay alive. Let your thoughts slow, let the noise soften, and let the first question open like a dim star in your mind. What happens when a planet forgets what it once was? The strangeness of Venus begins with familiarity. In size, it mirrors Earth. In mass, it echoes Earth. In position, it sits close enough that astronomers once called it our sister. But every similarity ends there, as if Venus looked at the blueprint of Earth and chose to reject it, line by line, layer by layer, memory by memory. Its rotation is reversed, as though time itself were flowing backward across its clouded surface. Its day is longer than its year, as if the rhythm of its past collapsed into a single, stretched breath. Its atmosphere is too dense, too hot, too chemically skewed to match any evolutionary path we understand. Its surface is unnervingly young, lacking the scars and wrinkles of 4.5 billion years. It is a planet that contradicts its own origin story. Imagine drifting above its golden clouds. The light is dim-filtered through sulfuric acid droplets, fractured by winds that circle the planet faster than the planet circles itself. Below the cloud deck is a world of pressure so heavy it would crush steel, heat so intense it melts lead. Silence so absolute it feels like the pause after a forgotten sentence. Yet beneath that violence, there is a deeper unease, something quieter, something more subtle. Nothing about this planet lines up with what it should remember. Planetary memory is not a metaphor. A world carries its past in measurable ways, in the layering of its rocks, in the patterns etched into its crust, in the chemical residues trapped inside its atmosphere, in the direction and speed of its rotation. Memory, for a planet, is physical. It is archived in stone, frozen in minerals, encoded in isotopes, preserved in scars. But Venus does not have the scars it should. It does not have the layers it should. It does not even have the rotational behavior it should. It is as though its historical record was once complete, and then, at some moment unknown, someone closed the book, tore out pages, rewrote chapters, and left only hints of the truth beneath fresh ink. When NASA's Magellan spacecraft mapped Venus with radar, the images returned were unsettling not because they were chaotic, but because they were too clean. The surface appeared young, no older than 300 to 700 million years, a geological infant compared to its true age. There were no continents drifting, no ancient mountain ranges worn by erosion, no layered history like Earth's. The planet looked reset, as though an event had wiped its memory clean, but the resetting of the surface is only the beginning. Its atmosphere is another riddle, a blanket of carbon dioxide 92 times thicker than Earth's, with chemical signatures that refuse to align with the models of natural planetary evolution. Isotopes that imply a past that cannot be reconciled with its present. Heat distribution that should be unstable, but remains eerily consistent. This is not just a hostile atmosphere. It is an atmosphere that behaves like a flawed reconstruction of something else, as if Venus once attempted to recreate the memory of a world it no longer clearly recalls. Even its rotation carries the mark of something rewritten. Venus spins backward, opposite nearly every other planet in the solar system, and it does so with deliberate slowness, as though resisting an older rhythm. Models suggest it may have once rotated the same way Earth does. Something changed it. But what force changes not only a planet's spin, but its direction, and leaves almost no trace of the event? Pause here. Let your breath slow to match the drifting pace of these clouds. A planet's rotation is among its most stable properties. It is not easily altered. To reverse a spin is to rewrite the deepest layer of planetary memory. It is to take a world and ask it to turn backward through its own history. Venus does this every moment. And if a planet can rotate in defiance of its past, what does that say about the rest of its story? Some scientists believe Venus once had oceans, calm water, a blue horizon softened by gentle warmth, a climate so moderate that, for a time, life may have been possible. But all evidence of that era is gone, evaporated, dismantled, lost. A world that may have known serenity now knows only survival. A world that may have held life now holds only heat. A world that may have carried memories now carries the echo of something forgotten. There is a concept rarely spoken outside circles of theoretical planetary science, called memory drift. It is the idea that under extreme conditions, the physical record a planet keeps of itself can slip, distort, or collapse. It is not mystical. It is not imagined. It is rooted in physics, in the way heat can erase structure, in the way pressure can reorder minerals, in the way catastrophic resurfacing can eliminate billions of years with a single planetary exhale. But Venus does not just appear drifted. It appears misaligned, as though the pieces of its past are present but placed in the wrong order, like a story retold by someone who remembers fragments but not their meaning. Consider this: the surface is too young, the atmosphere too extreme, the rotation too reversed, the climate too stable, the isotopes too contradictory, the geological record too incomplete. And yet all of these elements converge in a way that feels intentional, almost patterned, as though Venus is holding on to a version of itself that is not the one it lived. This is the conflict at the heart of Venus. Everything we observe tells us the planet used to be something else, but nothing it shows us tells us the truth of what that something else was. And so the question deepens. If Venus remembers wrong, what changed its memory? What force reshaped its past so thoroughly that the planet now reflects a history that does not belong to it? Theories attempt to answer. A colossal impact, a runaway greenhouse amplified beyond reason, volcanic resurfacing that drowned the old world in oceans of fire. Each theory captures a fraction of the truth, but none explain the coherence of the distortion. None account for the way all anomalies bend in the same direction, toward the sense of a world that lost its origin and replaced it with a new one. Let your breath slow again. Imagine drifting deeper into the clouds. Imagine the heat rising through your limbs, the pressure folding around you like memory thickening. Imagine the planet beneath you, silent, molten, and heavily rewritten. This is the drift, the part where the scientific edges soften into something speculative, but grounded, rooted in physics, rooted in evidence, but allowing space for possibility. What if Venus did not simply change? What if it transitioned between states of identity, from ocean world to inferno, in a way that erased the continuity between them? Planets evolve, yes, but Venus shows not evolution. It shows discontinuity, a break, a severing, a loss of narrative, like waking from a dream with only the last moment intact. And if the past is gone, how do we reconstruct a world that does not remember itself? We trace isotopes, we model atmospheres, we scrape signals from the planet's rotation, we read scars that were never allowed to form, we search for patterns where there should be chaos, and chaos where there should be pattern. Yet the deeper we look, the more Venus behaves like a world that has replaced its original memories with new ones, a world editing its own record, which leads to the quiet, unsettling thought that closes this chapter. Maybe Venus is not the planet we think it is. Maybe it is the planet it chose to become, after forgetting the one it used to be. And if memory can drift in a world of rock and fire, what else in this universe is allowed to forget? Before you let this thought dissolve into the darkness, hold one final breath, because the next question, the one waiting just beyond the clouds, is heavier than all the heat Venus carries. What if this forgetting was not natural? And as that question opens, we drift, quietly, into the next chapter. The question hangs in the heat above Venus like a suspended ember. If this forgetting was not natural, what force shaped the absence? What pressure? What catastrophe? What rewrite was powerful enough to fold an entire world into a younger skin? The idea settles into your breathing as the clouds thicken. They swirl slowly, as though stirred by something ancient, something that once tried to rise through them and failed. Below the cloud decks, the surface waits, smooth in places where it should be jagged, uniform where it should be fractured, quiet where it should be loud with the scars of age. Geologists expected Venus to resemble a wrinkled archive. After all, a planet born alongside Earth should bear similar marks. Mountains eroded by time, continents warped by collisions, valleys carved by the slow forgetting of wind and water. What Magellan revealed was the opposite, a surface barely old enough to belong to a mature world. The rocks were too fresh, the craters too few, the landforms too evenly distributed across the sphere. It was as though Venus had shed its history in a single sweeping gesture. Imagine a library where every volume has been rewritten at once. Spines still stand in rows, pages still flutter in the quiet, but the text inside no longer matches the age of the ink. This is the feeling Venus gives. A world whose library has been rewritten with younger words. Radar mapping showed vast plains of basaltic flows spreading outward like cooled ink from a broken pen. The lava patterns suggested something extraordinary. Not the slow volcanic renewal seen on Earth, but a global resurfacing event. A moment when almost the entire crust melted, collapsed, or overturned, erasing the genealogy of the planet. It is difficult to imagine the scale. Volcanism spanning thousands of kilometers, heat pulses rising through the mantle, the crust losing its identity in a single, overwhelming exhale. If this happened, it was not an evolution, it was an erasure. But the question deepens. A planetary meltdown of such magnitude must leave behind a sequence. Thermal gradients, magnetic anomalies, crustal fractures. Venus shows these hints, yes, but not with the clarity expected of a world that endured an apocalypse. The evidence is softened, blurred, like a photograph dipped in too much light. Why would a catastrophic event remove nearly all traces of itself? Some suggest Venus was simply unlucky. Its proximity to the Sun pushed it past stability, past balance, into a runaway greenhouse that transformed oceans into steam and steam into memoryless heat. But even runaway heat should leave a layered geological past. Even chaos has a timeline. Venus does not show chaos. It shows aftermath without the story. The conflict sits like a residue on every dataset. What we see and what should exist do not align. It is not just that Venus is young on the surface. It is young in a way that conceals the transition from old to new. That missing span, the quiet, blank interval between what was and what is, haunts every model. Signals from the highlands hint at crust formed before the resurfacing, but they are fragmentary. Small shards of a former world. Adrift in a sea of younger basalt, tesserae, those broken, ridged regions, may be the oldest surviving witnesses, but even they feel displaced, as though carried from another era and set down amid a world that no longer matches them. The more you listen to the patterns, the more Venus resembles a place trying to remember itself, but unable to retrieve the correct sequence of events. Breathe slowly now. Follow the ridgelines in your mind. Notice how they shift direction abruptly, as though the crust itself once resisted the rewriting. Notice how the plains spread outward, smooth as if polished by a single hand. Notice how the craters are few and far between, not because impacts were rare, but because the memory of those impacts was overwritten by the last flood of magma. Even the temperature hints at something unnatural. 467 degrees Celsius, steady across almost the entire globe. Too steady, too uniform. Heat should fluctuate more. It should respond to elevation, to latitude, to atmospheric circulation. But Venus behaves like a world locked in a single, static thermal state. It is the stability of something that refuses to change again. The atmosphere adds another layer to the enigma. 92 bars of pressure, the equivalent of standing beneath nearly a kilometer of ocean on Earth. Sulfuric acid clouds, carbon dioxide so concentrated that it becomes a sculptor of heat. And within these layers lie chemical ratios that contradict one another. Hydrogen isotopes suggest ancient oceans. Carbon isotopes suggest processes that do not align with the planet's current conditions. Sulfur signatures imply cycles that should have left layered deposits, but those deposits are nowhere to be found. It is as if pieces of a long and complex climate story remain, but the chapters connecting them have vanished. Scientists compare the atmosphere to a corrupted file, readable in fragments, incoherent as a whole. Something once organized has become scrambled. And if the atmosphere is a memory, then Venus is breathing through a recollection it no longer understands. Let the thought settle lightly. A world whose air is misremembered. A world inhaling its past in the wrong order. A world exhaling heat shaped by a history that no longer exists. Even the super-rotation of the upper atmosphere, winds circling the planet in just 4 Earth days, feels like a vestige of a different time. A leftover rhythm from a world that once spun faster, once cooled differently, once interacted with sunlight in a gentler way. It is a motion out of place, too rapid for the slow-turning sphere beneath it. A wind that remembers a Venus that no longer rotates. Down on the surface, the crust sits almost motionless. No tectonic plates shifting like Earth's. No continents riding currents of molten stone. No mountain ranges rising or falling over millennia. The planet seems reluctant to create new features, reluctant to accumulate additional history, as though tired of rewriting itself. Here lies a deeper conflict. If a planet loses its past, does it also lose its ability to evolve? A world without memory is a world without direction. This leads to the broader speculation. Still scientific, still grounded, but reaching toward the edges of what we can test. What if Venus experiences something akin to a physical amnesia? Not conscious, not intentional, but emergent from its own conditions. Heat erases, pressure blurs, volcanism resets, atmospheric chemistry distorts. In every direction we look, the mechanisms of forgetting are present, but forgetting alone does not explain the patterns. Memory loss is random. Venus is not random. The anomalies converge too neatly, as though shaped by a single overwhelming event. The resurfacing, the atmospheric rebuild, the rotational reversal, the thermal stabilization. Each points toward an epoch where something vast and transformative occurred. An epoch that ended the old Venus and began the new one in a single step. Imagine the surface glowing, a molten shell wrapping the globe. Imagine the crust, destabilizing, sliding beneath its own weight. Imagine the atmosphere thickening rapidly as water escapes, oxygen reacts, hydrogen flees into space. Imagine the rotation slowing under tidal torques amplified by heat and mantle deformation. If all of this happened at once, not over billions of years, but in a concentrated geological heartbeat, then Venus would emerge as we see it. A planet reborn, but without continuity. Continuity is the essence of memory. Without it, a world begins again without a hold on what came before. And so Venus stands today as a place with 2 ages. The one it truly has, and the one it presents. 4.5 billion years old, yet carrying a surface and atmosphere only a few 100 million years in character. 2 identities, 2 stories, only one of them visible. Let yourself descend further, past the haze, past the slowing winds, toward the plains that stretch endlessly under the gold-tinted gloom. Feel the heat rise around you, a force ancient and newborn at the same time. Feel the pressure tighten like the weight of unspoken truth. Feel the stillness. No seasons, no rain, no cool nights, no geological heartbeat. Only a world that has simplified itself into endurance. A planet that no longer accumulates memories may also be a planet that no longer wants to risk losing them again. And yet one question persists, faint but insistent, like a vibration beneath the crust. If Venus wiped its past clean, what was erased? The shapes of the highlands, the chemical traces in the clouds, the mismatched isotopes, all whisper the same thing. Something came before, something coherent, something Earth-like in its gentler days. What would a world with oceans have looked like here? Shallow seas reflecting violet skies, rivers winding through basaltic valleys before the heat rose, clouds of water vapor, not sulfuric acid, a climate mild enough to cradle early life, or at least the chemistry that precedes life. Then, suddenly, a shift so large it rewrote the entire script, a transition without a bridge, a leap without a timeline, a past cut away. The fading thought that floats upward from this possibility is simple, quiet, and heavy. If a world can lose itself so completely, what does that mean for the ones that still believe they remember who they are? The question does not end. It slips forward, softly, into the next movement of this long descent, a movement where the surface, freshly remade and eerily young, waits to be understood not as a beginning, but as a deliberate forgetting. The heat settles around you like a heavy curtain as the view drifts closer to the surface. The light grows dimmer, filtered through clouds thick enough to feel solid, clouds that hide not only the landscape but the memory of the world beneath them. Venus does not reveal itself easily. It reveals itself reluctantly, as though every detail exposed is a detail taken from some buried, overwritten past. The plains stretch outward in all directions, vast sheets of cooled basalt that look less like geography and more like a bandage laid over a forgotten wound. Their smoothness is unsettling. A planet of this age should be rougher, more fractured, more complicated. Instead, the surface reads like a single page. New, uncreased, a reset layer laid upon billions of years, now erased. Geological youth is not unusual by itself. Earth renews its crust constantly through tectonic movement. Mars retains ancient scars because it cooled early and froze in time. But Venus should be a blend. Old regions, young regions, transition zones where history can be traced. Instead, it is uniform in its youth, a world that behaves as if the clock of its crust was wound back to zero. The tesserae, those strange, ridged highlands, are the closest thing Venus has to ancestral memory. They rise like fractured fragments of an older story. Their shapes twist in unnatural angles, patterns folding over themselves as though once softened by heat, and then lifted again into solid form. These regions defy understanding. Their geology is older than the plains, but their narrative is still broken. They are pieces of a puzzle whose other pieces have been burned away. When you drift over a tessera region, the feeling is akin to reading a sentence carved into stone, where half the words have eroded away. The message persists, but its meaning has dissolved. Venus holds these remnants tightly, but they are not enough to reconstruct the full story of what came before. Some scientists believe the tesserae were continents, rising above oceans long vanished. Others argue they were once part of a dynamic crust, with plate tectonics resembling Earth's early behavior. But no theory fits all observations. Every explanation leaves a seam exposed, a mismatch, a contradiction. The planet resists interpretation. It resists being known. This resistance is part of the conflict at its core. Venus gives hints of its past, but it does not give permission to assemble them. It offers fragments without chronology. It offers patterns without causation. It offers features without origin. It is like listening to someone speak in a language you almost remember from childhood. Familiar enough to stir recognition, alien enough to defy translation. The plains tell one story, renewal. The tesserae tell another, survival. The atmosphere tells yet another, transformation. The rotation whispers something else entirely, reversal. 4 conflicting stories, all happening at once on a world that refuses to reconcile them. Take a moment and breathe. Feel the weight of these contradictions. Let them settle like dust on your thoughts. Every planetary dataset points toward a different history, and yet all those histories converge on the same conclusion. Something enormous happened. Something powerful enough to remove the narrative thread connecting Venus's past to its present. The global resurfacing hypothesis. The idea that the entire crust melted or collapsed within a geologically short window is the most accepted theory. Yet, even this theory carries fractures. If resurfacing was truly global, why do some tesserae remain? Why are there variations in elevation that do not match a uniform collapse? Why does the chemistry of certain rocks imply processes that should not exist? If the surface was completely renewed, the questions ripple outward. Scientists try to simulate the event in supercomputers, but the models do not agree. Some simulations produce too much volcanism. Others produce too little. Some show the crust shattering. Others show it sinking. None produce the exact patterns Magellan observed. This is where doubt deepens, not in the data, but in our ability to understand a planet that does not follow the rules. Venus seems to exist in a space between explanations, a world that obeys physics but not interpretation. If the resurfacing was not uniform, what determined which regions were erased? and which were preserved. If oceans truly once existed, what was their final moment like? Were they boiled away slowly over millions of years? Or did they vanish in a catastrophic instant, leaving no time for the crust to keep a record? One isotope ratio deuterium to hydrogen suggests Venus lost its water rapidly. Rapid loss is dramatic. Rapid loss is violent. Rapid loss is unforgettable. And yet Venus forgot it. What force can erase a trauma of planetary scale? We drift lower, toward a region where volcanic domes rise like frozen bubbles. They appear gentle, almost soft in outline, yet they are monuments to the planet's molten heart. Their distribution is strange, not random, not ordered, but arranged in patterns that seem meaningful. Without revealing the meaning, these domes rise from lava that once pushed upward, but never erupted explosively. They are signs of a mantle that was restless, pressurized, on the verge of reshaping the world again. And yet the domes remain intact, suggesting a sudden cessation of volcanic activity, as if the planet took a final breath of fire and then held it indefinitely. Volcanism on Venus may not be dead, but it is sleeping in a way that feels unnatural. A planet this hot should be geologically active. A mantle this energetic should force the crust to evolve. Instead, Venus has become still, paradoxically still like something holding itself in place, so as not to disrupt a fragile equilibrium. It is tempting to imagine the planet trying not to repeat whatever happened last. A world that has forgotten may also fear remembering. Yet fear is not a scientific concept. Stillness, however, stillness under pressure is. If the crust is too rigid, if the lithosphere is too thick, if the mantle loses conductive pathways, a planet can become locked, unable to remake itself. But Venus is not simply locked. It is locked in a way that aligns with a memory overwritten, as though the end of its last transformation was not a slow cooling, but a forced stabilization. Let the observation sink in. Venus behaves like a world that was told to stop moving. And the atmosphere above it, dense and metallic in its chemistry, acts like a seal, a barrier between the world and its former self, a reminder of what escaped, a tomb for what remains. We move now across a fault line, subtle but detectable. It stretches hundreds of kilometers, barely raised above the plains around it. On Earth, such faults would indicate the edges of tectonic plates. On Venus, they indicate something different: pressure that had nowhere to go, energy that shifted but did not migrate. The crust flexed, but refused to break into drifting sections. It is a world whose spine bends, but never fractures. This refusal is part of its identity. Earth disperses heat through tectonics. Venus hoards heat. Earth diversifies its geography. Venus simplifies. Earth reveals its past through layers. Venus buries its past beneath one overwhelming gesture. And yet, as the radar data shows, the surface is not perfectly smooth. There are fractures. There are folds. There are scars. But they are all recent, as though drawn on a fresh canvas. A fresh canvas implies an artist. In the scientific sense, the artist is the resurfacing process. But something about Venus makes the metaphor feel literal. The entire crust recreated in a single episode, as if someone decided the old painting had to be destroyed before the new one could be applied. This is not mysticism. It is a reflection of scale. Planetary events can be so vast that they resemble intention. What we see now is a planet missing its prequel. A planet with a second beginning instead of a first. A planet that remembers only its rebirth, not the lifetime preceding it. The heat presses closer. The silence grows heavier. Even the winds above seem unwilling to disturb the stillness here. In this moment, the question that rises is not scientific but emotional. If Venus once held oceans, blue, shimmering, alive with potential, did the planet feel its own loss as those waters vanished into the void? The question is unanswerable, yet it lingers. Loss leaves traces, even if the memory of what was lost is gone. And Venus is filled with traces. They live in isotopes, in fractured highlands, in a backward spin, in the uniformity of a surface that should be diverse, in the tension between what should be and what is. These traces gather now, forming a soft outline of a truth we cannot yet articulate. that the planet beneath us is both ancient and young, both known and unknowable, both preserved and erased. And in this ambiguity, something deeper begins to breathe, something that will soon reshape the way we think about what planets can be. Not static worlds of stone and gas, but evolving records of memory and forgetting, held together by forces far greater than time alone. The drift continues, and the surface below waits, holding the next unanswered question in the molten quiet of its buried past. The quiet beneath the clouds deepens until it feels almost physical, a weight that settles not on the skin but on the mind. Venus, for all its heat and pressure, possesses a kind of stillness that does not belong to a violent world. It is the stillness of aftermath, the kind that follows an event vast enough to redefine a planet. The ground below stretches like a dark, cooled tide. Basaltic plains lie shoulder to shoulder with barely any sign of erosion. Rivers never carved them. Winds never reshaped them. Time, it seems, never touched them at all. A planet that should be covered in the fingerprints of billions of years instead wears a single expression, smooth and recent, like it was placed there long after the rest of the solar system had already grown old. As you move across this surface, there is an eerie uniformity. Features repeat, not identically, but with a sameness that suggests they formed in one shared moment, one global upheaval that erased everything preceding it. It is this sameness that unsettles geologists, because sameness on a planetary scale implies a synchronized trigger, and synchronization is rare in worlds made of fire and rock. Usually, planets change in mosaic patterns. One region cools while another warms. One plate shifts while another stalls. Even on Mars, the scars of its violent youth are uneven, spread across time and geography. But Venus behaves as though all its regions agreed, all at once. To start over, imagine the crust, liquefying, just enough to flow. Imagine the mantle, rising in plumes that merged, not as scattered fountains of magma, but as a single planetary convulsion. Imagine heat, unbuilding mountains, and flattening valleys before rebuilding them anew, in shapes that bear no resemblance to what came before. If such a moment happened, the planet would emerge with no chronological record, no geological inheritance, no memory of its parents, only a blank surface, ready to accumulate new stories. But Venus has not accumulated new stories. Not really. Its surface remains too calm, too static, as if the planet does not trust itself to evolve again, as if the last transformation carried consequences so final that change itself became dangerous. Volcanic activity should continue. Heat this intense should generate new fractures, new flows, new landscapes. Yet everything appears paused. Detection of active volcanism has been ambiguous, often inconclusive. A faint suggestion here, a temperature anomaly there, nothing resembling the dynamic churn one would expect from a body under such internal stress. It is as if the planet's interior still breathes, but holds that breath, refusing to disturb the fragile reconstruction on its surface. Why hold still? What force could persuade an entire world to remain in a kind of geothermal suspense? This is where the deeper conflict emerges. Venus acts like a system that has reached an equilibrium, not because equilibrium is natural, but because instability is unbearable. Consider the atmosphere again. Dense, unyielding, its pressure high enough to crush a descending probe in moments. Its chemical makeup suggests runaway amplification, carbon dioxide saturating the sky, sulfur compounds cycling relentlessly, heat trapped so efficiently that even the night side barely cools. But the most baffling part is not the intensity of the heat, it is the consistency. A planet that rotates so slowly, with one side facing the sun for months at a time, should exhibit a dramatic contrast between day and night. Yet Venus stays almost uniform in temperature everywhere, as if refusing to admit that night exists at all. Uniformity of temperature on a slowly spinning world is not just unusual, it is unnatural. This suggests feedback loops locked in place, mechanisms of heat redistribution far more efficient than any we see elsewhere. A planet that becomes this uniform is a planet resisting further change. Heat is memory too. It tells the story of energy, of movement, of how matter interacts with time. But Venus's heat is a page stuck open, a narrative that refuses new chapters. The slow backward rotation adds to the sense of defiance. A world that turns in reverse is not simply unusual. It is behaving as though it has rejected the direction of its own past. Rotational reversal is not a gentle phenomenon. It requires either enormous external torque or internal reshaping so profound that the entire planet shifts its angular momentum. Yet Venus shows no surviving marks of a collision powerful enough to flip its spin. No moon torn from its crust, no basin deep enough to indicate a colossal impact. The absence of such evidence is a kind of evidence in itself. If a force changed Venus's rotation, it did so without leaving the kind of wound we know how to recognize. Something altered the planet's rhythm, its cosmic heartbeat, and then erased the scar. Let yourself drift lower, as if brushing the edge of a volcanic rise. Domes curve upward, not sharp like terrestrial cones, but rounded, bulging gently like bubbles caught mid-burst. They are fragile shapes, too symmetrical, too quiet. Something prevented them from collapsing or erupting further. Something froze them in that moment and kept them suspended. Patterns across these domes resemble half-completed thoughts. They begin to form, then halt. Trails of lava show motion that stopped abruptly, as though the planet paused mid-sentence. This idea that Venus speaks in sentences of rock is not poetic indulgence. Geology is a language. Lava flows are verbs, faults are interrogations, mountains are declarations. And the resurfacing event was a full stop, followed by silence. Silence so complete that even now its echo shapes the atmosphere above it. Take another breath. Let the silence expand. On Earth, we read history in layers. Every stratum is a memory, a fossilized moment in the slow unfolding of time. But on Venus, there are no layers. There is only a single sheet, thin in geological terms, resting atop the void of lost eras. It is not simply that Venus lacks memory. It is that Venus lacks the space where memory should be stored. This absence is not merely mysterious. It is instructive. It pushes us to consider whether planets can undergo transformations so absolute that they erase their own past and redefine their own identity. If so, what we see on Venus is not a world with missing information. It is a world that has been rewritten, and rewrite implies authorship, not conscious, not deliberate, but emergent from forces that exceed our intuitive sense of scale. Forces capable of reshaping continents, reordering atmospheres, slowing rotation, boiling oceans, and sealing the crust in a single global exhale. Forces that transform a world so completely that the only version it remembers is the version it became afterward. We move again, gliding across a plane that looks almost flat, but is not truly flat at all. Radar reveals subtle undulations, patterns consistent with convection, the mantle pushing faintly upward against the frozen surface. The planet's interior has not died. It murmurs beneath the crust, a low, slow restlessness, as though waiting for a moment that never arrives. This waiting is its own kind of tension. Venus is not stable. It is held in place, held by heat, held by pressure, held by an equilibrium that feels less like peace and more like restraint. And in that restraint, the deeper question forms. If Venus is a world rebuilt, what was lost in the rebuilding? What shapes? What oceans? What climates? What possibilities? We have the chemistry of lost water. We have tectonic hints of an earlier mobility. We have a rotation that suggests a different past. We have terrain that does not match the age of the planet. We have atmosphere that behaves like a reconstruction instead of a lineage. Pieces. Only pieces, scattered like fragments from a shattered memory. The planet does not resist us out of malice. It resists because nothing remains that can answer fully. It is a survivor of its own transformation, bearing only the faintest outline of what it once was. And as you hold this realization, let the thought stretch, gentle and slow. If a planet can be stripped of its continuity, if an entire world can forget its original story, then the implications stretch far beyond Venus. into everything we assume about planetary lives, about stability, about permanence itself. The drifting does not stop. The heat does not ease. The surface does not offer closure. Instead, it opens into another question, waiting quietly in the molten deep. A question about what kind of force could erase not just features, but the very sequence of a world's history. The surface darkens as though the clouds above have thickened, but the dimness you feel is not merely the absence of sunlight. It is the presence of something unspoken, an old tension sealed inside the crust, a silence heavy enough to press against thought itself. Venus does not speak, yet everything about it feels like the hesitation before a truth too large to name. The land beneath the haze stretches in great unfurling sheets, but here and there, subtle rises ripple across the plains. These rises, called coronae, are among the most enigmatic structures on the planet. Round, elevated, fractured at the edges, they resemble the outlines of memories trying to surface. Patterns of uplift and collapse circle them, like rings in a tree trunk. But the chronology is indecipherable. A corona may begin to rise, then sink, then fracture, then remain frozen in a state that does not match any stable model. When scientists map these features, they look for stories: flow, uplift, tension, release, but coronae often defy narrative. They display signs of processes that should not coexist. They behave like chapters rearranged out of order, a record of events that do not align with the expected timeline of crustal evolution. It is here, hovering above one of these great circular scars, that the sense of distortion becomes impossible to ignore. Venus is not merely young on the surface, it is internally confused. Its geology contains moments that do not remember one another. We descend closer. Fractures spider outward from the rim, sharp at first, then fading into the surrounding plains. The rock here is brittle, yet the shapes it forms suggest that, once, it was softened by unimaginable heat. The planet carries both fragility and power, the signature of a trauma so vast that the crust could not decide whether to shatter or yield. Heat signatures ripple faintly across the ground, not enough to indicate active flows, but enough to remind you that something beneath is always pushing, always waiting. The mantle of Venus rises in slow plumes beneath the crust, immense towers of molten rock that swell upward but rarely break through. On Earth, such plumes create volcanic islands, chains of eruptions, mountains that bloom like stone flowers. But on Venus, the plumes seem restrained, as though the crust resists giving way, or the mantle hesitates to ascend fully. What causes this hesitation? Heat should encourage motion. Pressure should promote release. Yet Venus moves only halfway, as though each geological impulse is caught between action and remembrance. This liminality, this state of almost, permeates the entire planet. The plains are almost smooth. The coronae are almost symmetrical. The domes are almost erupted. The faults are almost shifted. Every feature feels like something that was meant to continue, but did not. Something interrupted, something paused before completion. It is as if, after its great resurfacing, the planet began to rebuild its story, only to abandon the effort when the first words did not match the memory of what came before. Imagine a world attempting to reform its identity, with only partial fragments of its former self. As it tries to write, the sentences stall. As it tries to move, the crust stiffens. As it tries to cool, the atmosphere locks heat in place. As it tries to forget, small remnants of the past intrude. These remnants live in details barely visible, tiny variations in elevation, routes of ancient lava, chemical fingerprints embedded in rock. Each one is a whisper from an earlier Venus, a Venus that existed before the reset. The surface temperature glows in infrared like a steady heartbeat, not rising, not falling, simply enduring. Such constancy is unnatural in a world exposed to extreme sunlight by day and plunged into darkness for months by night. But Venus refuses contrast, refuses variation, refuses the oscillation of time. Here, temperature is memory frozen into permanence. In a place where heat should fluctuate wildly, uniformity reigns. This uniformity behaves like an anchor, a planetary constraint, holding everything in a narrow range that prevents further shifts. Just as a traumatized mind may cling to rigid patterns to avoid recalling what hurt it, a planet may settle into thermal stasis as the only survivable state. After losing its oceans, its climate, its identity, scientists do not speak of this comparison because planets are not conscious. But the physics remains. Systems destabilized to the brink can collapse into simplified patterns that eliminate the possibility of returning to earlier, more complex states. Venus is one of these systems, and the simplicity is not peace, it is containment. Move now across a region dotted with pancake domes. They are wide, flat, with steep edges that rise abruptly, before leveling into perfect disks. On Earth, such structures would require viscous lava, erupting gently and spreading like thick batter. The uniformity of these domes on Venus is striking. They appear in clusters, each shaped as though by the same unseen rule. But volcanic behavior should not be this uniform. Lava composition varies, eruptive dynamics vary, even mantle plumes vary. Yet here, everything converges toward a single type of expression, a kind of volcanic handwriting, repeated again and again. Scientists search for explanations, compositional similarities, pressure regimes, viscosity models. But these answers feel partial, as though they account for the shape, but not the repetition. Repetition suggests memory, a retained pattern, but Venus's past is missing. So where did the pattern come from? Perhaps from the resurfacing event itself. Perhaps the planet imprinted a single template of eruption during its global reset, and every expression afterward echoes that template. A world with only one remembered way to form a volcano. A world whose geology is a broken record of its own rebirth. We pass beyond the domes, into a set of faulted plains. These plains ripple with ridges, long, low features shaped by compression. The ridges run parallel for hundreds of miles, as though the entire crust was squeezed by an invisible hand. But compression alone does not explain the pattern. Why squeezed only here? Why aligned in this direction? Why preserved so perfectly? Fault lines tell stories of stress, but on Venus they tell a story without beginning or end. No sequence, no transition, only the result, frozen in place. You breathe slowly, and the air of Venus, though you cannot feel it, seems to thicken in imagination, full of sulfuric haze and heavy molecules. This atmosphere, dense enough to sculpt stone with pressure alone, circulates with winds that race around the planet, while the surface remains unmoving. Two rhythms, two layers, two worlds sharing a single body. Above, a sky that remembers velocity. Below, a crust that remembers stillness. The disconnect is startling. It is as though the atmosphere belongs to the Venus that once spun faster, while the surface belongs to the Venus that emerged after the reset. One planet, two inherited motions, neither aligned with the other. Atmospheric models struggle to explain the superrotation. It is fast, too fast. It behaves as though driven by a memory of a world that once turned quickly beneath it, a momentum preserved even after the crust slowed to a near standstill. If this is true, then Venus carries two temporal identities at once. The air remembers one rotation, the planet remembers another. Such a disjunction is more than strange. It is diagnostic. It reveals that Venus did not evolve smoothly. It transitioned abruptly, leaving parts of itself behind. And when a system leaves parts of itself behind, memory fractures. The fractured memory of Venus is not metaphorical. It is physical. It is measurable. It is etched into every layer of the planet that refuses to behave like its neighbors. Fragments of the old world exist, but they float disconnected, unable to assemble into a coherent past. What remains is a kind of geological amnesia, where the planet continues forward, on a timeline severed from its history. Yet, even in this amnesia, you can sense an unfinished question, rising from the molten quiet beneath the crust. If Venus once lived another life, how much of that life still lingers, buried in the folds of its distorted memory, waiting for a way to be read again? The haze deepens until the sky feels less like an atmosphere and more like an interior, a great enclosed chamber of heat and pressure, where sound would travel sluggishly and light would lose its will to move. Yet even in this suffocating quiet, there is a sense that something unresolved still pulses beneath the crust. Venus does not speak in clear signals, but the contradictions it holds begin to sharpen into a pattern, not a solution, not an answer, but a consistent unease that threads through every layer of the planet. The fractures across the plains grow denser as we drift over a region shaped by the slow, tortured uplift of the mantle. These fractures form tessellations, geometric, repeating, like a system trying to organize itself. Even as it tears apart, they resemble the cracking of enamel on a vessel heated too quickly, lines branching from unseen stress that once built quietly until the surface could bear no more. Stress, on a planetary scale, is a form of memory. It accumulates, it stores energy, it waits for release. But on Venus, release is elusive. The crust is too rigid to shift like Earth's, yet too warm to fully stabilize. It hovers in a state between locked and melting, as though undecided about what kind of planet it wants to be. This indecision is everywhere, in ridges that fold without breaking, in plains that melt without flowing, in domes that rise without erupting, in winds that race atop a surface that barely moves. Venus is a world of half-actions, gestures that begin but never complete, processes that start but refuse to transform. A planet caught mid-thought. As we move toward a region strewn with large volcanic constructs, the air grows thick with the sense of something ancient, trying to make itself known. These structures, massive shields and low, broad edifices, look almost dormant, yet radar hints at subtle thermal signatures. They are warm enough to question, cool enough to doubt. On Earth, active volcanism breathes visibly. Gases vent, magma wells, the ground trembles with purpose. On Venus, the breathing is shallow, a muted rhythm beneath the crust, as if the planet exerts tremendous effort not to wake fully. Some research teams believe Venus is still active, not violently, but intermittently, in slow pulses that do not reshape the surface. So much as remind it that the interior has not died. If this is true, the resurfacing event may not have been a complete erasure, but the first act in a longer cycle that the planet has not yet gathered strength to repeat. Cycles leave memories, even when the memories are faint. You drift down toward a cluster of lava channels. They wind across the plains with strange continuity, their paths almost too deliberate, too smooth, as though the lava once flowed, not under chaotic pressure, but under a kind of calm momentum. This is unusual. Lava should pulse, branch, erupt in fits, but here the channels behave like rivers, steady and coherent. A river of stone remembers direction. It remembers gravity. It remembers the conditions that birthed it. But these channels do not align with the expected slope or topography. Some run uphill, in gentle defiance of logic, suggesting that at the time they formed, the crust was moving, tilting, shifting, reshaping beneath them. This means the surface we see today is not the surface that existed when these channels were alive. Again, the sense of a world rewritten. It is in these peculiar clues, lava flowing against gradient, plains too smooth for their age, faults too perfect, fractures too inconsistent, that the idea forms quietly, as all true realizations do. Venus may not simply have lost its history, it may have lost its sequence. History is not only events, it is the order of events. A planet can experience every transformation in the universe, but without sequence, there is no narrative, only noise. Venus is full of signals, without sequence, a past without order, a memory without time. This explains why scientists can infer oceans that once existed, but cannot trace their disappearance. It explains why isotopes remember water, but rocks do not. Why atmosphere remembers sunlight, but surface remembers darkness. Why rotation remembers reversal, but mantle remembers forward momentum. Different layers remember different eras. The planet is an archive whose pages have been shuffled. You move across another uplifted ridge. This one is steep, sharper than the plains around it, colored differently in radar reflections. It hints at an age older than its surroundings, a survivor of the pre-reset world. Yet the ridge ends abruptly, as though severed by the resurfacing. It is the geological equivalent of a sentence cut in half. Much of Venus is composed of sentences that end abruptly. The ridge itself is warped, as if the crust beneath it once sagged, then rose again, then solidified too quickly to finish the transition. Its shape contains echoes of more than one state, but the outline is incomplete. It remembers movement, but not the direction of that movement. A memory overwritten, but only halfway. As the sensory picture deepens, a new kind of stillness emerges. Not the quiet of a dead planet, but the quiet of a planet that has not yet resolved the meaning of its own transformation. Below the crust, mantle convection churns slowly. It is a vast engine, immense, patient, governing the internal life of the planet. Convection is the heartbeat of geology. On Earth, it drives drifting continents. On Io, it powers relentless volcanic storms. On Venus, the heartbeat exists, but the body does not move with it. The crust is too thick for continents, too stubborn for subduction, too bound for collapse. The mantle breathes, the crust does not. A body breathing beneath a rigid shell is a body under tension. Pressure accumulates. Heat rises, yet the shell holds. What happens to a planet when the mechanism that should release its memory fails to function? The answer is in the temperature, in the density of the air, in the lack of water, in the absence of erosion, in the silence of mountains that no longer grow or fall, in plains that no longer age, in a spin that no longer reflects the planet's true past. The answer is everywhere and nowhere. A planet caught between what it was and what it became. A world whose memory is partitioned, disordered, misaligned with itself. This misalignment is not a metaphor. It is a measurable state. The chemical disequilibrium of the atmosphere, the mechanical disequilibrium of the crust, the dynamical disequilibrium of the rotation. No layer agrees with any other layer about what Venus is supposed to be. And this disagreement gives rise to the idea scientists nearly avoid saying aloud, that Venus is not simply a broken record of geological time, but a reconstructed one. Reconstruction implies a moment when the original structure is no longer viable, when meltdown or collapse forces a system to rebuild, using whatever fragments remain. Imagine taking apart a complex machine, melting half of its components, and attempting to rebuild it from warped pieces and incomplete schematics. The machine might function, but strangely, it might behave as though remembering how it once worked, but unable to recreate that function exactly. Venus operates like such a machine. Heat that should rise stays trapped. Crust that should migrate stays fixed. Atmosphere that should evolve stays locked. Rotation that should stabilize drifts into reverse. These are not random anomalies. They are coordinated relics of a world that has survived, a transformation so total that it is no longer certain which version of itself is real. As you drift over yet another fracture, a long, sinuous tear that curves gently, before disappearing under younger flows, it becomes impossible not to feel that this planet carries more than heat, more than pressure, more than lost oceans. It carries the shape of an absence vast enough to alter continents, reverse the sky, erase chronology, and force a world to begin again from whatever pieces remained. And in that absence, a soft question rises, unspoken by the planet, but present in the quiet it holds. If a world can survive forgetting itself, what secret lies hidden in the space where its memory once lived? The space beneath you settles again, a heat-heavy silence stretching across the horizon, as though the entire planet is exhaling in slow motion. For a world this violent, the quiet is unnerving, not the stillness of peace, but the stillness of something held back, attention folded beneath the crust, waiting, pressing, remembering without the ability to say what it remembers. Far ahead, a region rises where the plains buckle softly, curving upward into vast plateaus. that look almost natural, until radar strips away the haze and reveals patterns no randomness could produce. The plateaus are too smooth on top, too steep at the edges, their boundaries sharp, as if cut by a single sweeping force. The shapes resemble shields, broad, shallow domes, formed not by slow uplift, but by pressure that once pressed upward everywhere at once, and then abruptly stopped. Stopping is the theme of Venus. Processes begin, accelerate, grow bold, and then freeze mid-gesture, as if the planet carries a memory of motion, but no longer the capacity for completion. We pass over a scarp that descends into a lower plane. The drop is sheer, almost knife-straight. On Earth, such a feature would mark a fault line where plates once diverged, but Venus has no plates. Its crust does not drift. The scarp suggests a tear in a body that should not be able to tear this way, and yet it does. It tears and then stops. It begins a story and then abandons it. Everywhere you look, the planet is halfway through something it never finished. Along the scarp's base, radar echoes reveal fractures radiating outward, like the spokes of a broken wheel. The pattern is too radial, too symmetrical, suggesting a central point of force, a rising plume or a collapsing void. But neither model fully explains the geometry. It is not the existence of these structures that confounds researchers, but the way they relate to one another. Every geological expression seems correct in isolation, but incorrect in context. Features line up, the way memories line up in someone who lived through a trauma, sharply in detail, but disconnected in sequence. This planet does not simply forget, it remembers in fragments. The deeper we move into this region, the more pronounced the fractures become. Some are tens of miles long, thin as threads but perfectly straight, unnaturally straight, cutting across terrain that should have resisted such a clean break. Others curve, their paths sinuous and unpredictable, as if following the ghost of an older landscape that lies buried beneath the basalt. Buried landscapes are not uncommon. Earth buries its own past under sediment, ash, ice. But on Venus, burial is different. It is total. A single event appears to have entombed not layers, but the entire geological ancestry of the world. Yet traces endure, not enough to reconstruct, but enough to haunt. We ascend slightly, and below, a tessera field emerges, one of the most enigmatic terrains anywhere in the solar system. The patterns are angular, fractured, interlocking like shattered tiles pressed back together. They are older than the plains around them, older than the plateau, older, perhaps, than anything else that survived the annihilation of Venus's earlier self. These regions may be the last testimony of the world that existed before the reset. But the testimony is fragmented, as if the planet itself is unsure which parts are true. Some tesserae tilt at steep angles, suggesting tectonic forces that no longer operate. Others lie flat but heavily deformed, as though squeezed by unimaginable pressure, and then released too quickly. They show a memory of violence, but not the cause of that violence. Loss without context. Damage without narrative. A record of pain, without the origin of pain. Here, the crust folds and twists, like a page that was burned at the edges, and then pressed flat again. After the fire was gone, we push lower. The radar outlines sharpen, patterns become more deliberate, and something new begins to emerge. A sense that these regions were not merely survivors of the resurfacing event, but obstacles the resurfacing could not erase. As though the planet tried to wipe everything, but some pieces held on, anchored too deeply, or formed too differently to be unmade. Their resistance is a form of memory, a deeper memory, rooted in structure rather than sequence. A world that cannot recall its past in order may still recall its past in shape. Shapes like these, shapes that refuse to blend into the new surface, shapes that resist the smoothness of the reset planet. We cross into the interior of the tessera field. The ground becomes a labyrinth, ridges crossing ridges, lines intersecting at impossible angles, blocks of crust rotated relative to one another, like pieces of a planet-sized puzzle, forced into mismatched slots. At first glance, the geometry looks chaotic, but the longer you observe, the more a pattern emerges. not in the arrangement, but in the discontinuity itself. Each fragment appears to carry a memory of a different stage in Venus's early life. But those stages are layered, without order. Ancient lies beside less ancient, compressed against something younger still. The entire region is a geological collage, a world that cannot forget completely, yet cannot remember coherently. This is why tesserae resist interpretation. They do not preserve history. They preserve mishistory, versions of the past, not aligned with one another. Fragments of eras that were once sequential now lie side by side, like shuffled pages. From above, the field resembles a broken clock. All the parts present, none in the correct position. You feel the weight of this recognition settle. Venus's surface is not simply young. It is reassembled from fragments that remained after catastrophe, fragments forced together, not by intention, but by survival. A crust made from memory shards. The winds above race at hurricane speeds, but here on the ground, nothing moves. Not dust, not sand, not the smallest grain. Pressure glues everything in place. Even time feels thick, resistant, heavy. And from this heaviness arises a question. Soft, persistent, unavoidable. If these are the last remnants of the Venus that once existed, what kind of world were they part of? What landscape? What climate? What seas or storms or skies left these patterns behind? The answers are buried under the smooth plains and frozen domes, under the silence of a rotation reversed, under an atmosphere that seals the planet, in a greenhouse of eternal forgetting. But the tesserae whisper, faintly, fracturedly, that a different Venus once breathed here, a Venus that lived before the reset, a Venus whose memory is scattered, not lost, waiting in fragments, for someone to recognize the shape beneath the shattering. And as you drift across the last edge of the tesserae, the next question gathers, like heat rising through the crust. A question not about what was destroyed, but about what force had the power to destroy in such a complete and selective way. The landscape softens again as we drift beyond the tesserae, leaving behind the fractured echoes of the planet's oldest self. But the silence that follows is not empty. It is charged. The way the air feels after lightning, long after the thunder has faded. Something has happened here, something vast, something capable of erasing an entire planetary memoir, while leaving behind only the most stubborn fragments. The plains ahead shimmer faintly in radar reflections. They stretch uninterrupted to the horizon, smooth as poured glass, their vastness unsettling in its lack of detail. On Earth, such uniform surfaces would mark young lava flows, fresh terrain born from volcanic renewal. But renewal on Earth happens regionally, piecemeal, in waves. This looks like a single act, a resurfacing not confined by geography, but applied across the entire face of a planet, a gesture so large, it would defy imagination. If the evidence were not so brutally clear, the depth of these plains, how thick the basaltic layers truly are, remains uncertain. They could be hundreds of meters deep. They could be kilometers. No lander has survived long enough to sample beneath the topmost crust. But radar hints at their consistency, their sameness, their uninterrupted youth. It is youth without childhood, a young surface without an evolutionary path. Most worlds grow into their geologies. Venus appears to have awakened in its current form, a planet that skipped its adolescence, stepped directly into maturity, and then froze. This kind of discontinuity raises questions that standard planetary science struggles to hold. Because for such a surface to exist, the process that created it must have been not merely global, but overwhelming. A mantle overturn, a catastrophic eruption of plumes across the hemisphere, a phase transition in the crust itself. Each theory carries weight, but none explain the timing. Why the resurfacing was so complete, why it happened when it did, why it left behind only scattered fragments instead of partial layers, and why it has not happened again. The crust is hot, thin in places, pressurized from below. It should be unstable. It should break, subduct, melt, rise. But it does not. It endures. A world that was once volatile, now behaves like a shell that refuses to open. As you drift lower toward a region filled with subtle ripple marks, long, parallel ridges shaped by compression, you sense the enormity of this contradiction. These ridges are delicate for a planet this violent, as if they formed in the gentle settling after unimaginable chaos. Compression without collapse, stress without release. Venus is full of processes that reach halfway and then stop. Along one ridge, the crust folds over itself, but the fold is incomplete, as though halted at the moment of transformation. It is like finding a wave, caught mid-crest, frozen by something stronger than momentum. What force interrupts geology? With such precision, you glide farther, and the terrain begins to show faint circular patterns, ancient impact craters, one of the few ways we still estimate the age of the surface. There are too few of them, far too few. A planet billions of years old should be littered with craters, like pockmarks on the Moon or Mercury. But Venus's surface contains only a sparse scattering, and many of those appear pristine, barely eroded, as if they formed recently, on a world that had no record of previous impacts. This absence is telling. It is not simply that Venus was missed by asteroids. It is that Venus erased the evidence of eons. A planet that destroys its own scars is a planet that destroys its own story. The size distribution of craters adds yet another layer of unease. Most planets display a range: small, medium, large. But Venus lacks small craters. The thick atmosphere incinerates smaller objects before they reach the surface. Only larger impactors survive the descent. This would make sense if the atmosphere always existed in its current form, but the isotope ratios argue otherwise. They whisper of oceans, of milder skies, of a time when water softened the crust, when sunlight reached the surface without scorching it. The atmosphere we see now is a reconstruction, a final stage, a locked state, which begs the question, when did it lock, and why did it not change again? You drift through the thick air, imagining the moment when the last droplets of water escaped into the upper atmosphere and broke apart under solar radiation, hydrogen fleeing into space, oxygen reacting violently with the crust, until nothing remained to bind it. A planet dies when it loses its water, but Venus did not simply die. It transformed. A greenhouse spiral began, a runaway process in which each degree of warming triggers the next degree. Clouds thickened, heat grew, oceans boiled, rock outgassed carbon dioxide. The atmosphere reinforced the feedback until stability was impossible. A cascade, a collapse, a world unmade. And as the process accelerated, as the surface melted and the crust overturned, as oceans rose into the sky and vanished, the planet lost its ability to store a coherent record of events. Heat scrubs memory, pressure overwrites it, melting destroys sequence, volatility reshuffles order. A planet can forget, the same way matter forgets. Its crystalline shape, when heated past its limit, it is here, floating in the thickest part of the atmosphere, that you sense a truth the data implies, but rarely says aloud. Venus's surface is not only young because it was made new. It is young because the old world could not survive in any recognizable form. Once the cascade began, every memory of oceans, of moderate sunlight, of plate movement, of calmer skies, was erased in the furnace of transformation. And yet, not everything vanished. The rotation changed. The crust bore new shapes. The atmosphere rebuilt itself in a configuration that does not match its past. These mismatches are not noise. They are signals. Signals that the planet lost its continuity, its ability to carry one moment smoothly into the next. Continuity is the essence of identity. A world without continuity is a world that must redefine itself. Venus redefined itself. In fire, we glide toward a region scarred by ancient lava channels. Their smoothness tells a story. Lava once flowed here for great distances, but the paths it chose do not correspond with the slopes beneath them. Channels run uphill, fork unpredictably, merge where they should diverge. These are the signs of a crust in motion during the moment of flow. a world reshaping itself as the lava moved. The land rose and fell, underneath the molten rivers, like a body shifting under a blanket. Such behavior is impossible today. The crust is too stable now, too locked. The channels are the last breath of a dynamic world. Before the planet solidified into its current stillness, a trace of motion, caught in stone, memory, frozen, in a single image. You hover above one channel that curves sharply, before disappearing beneath a younger plane. The curve makes no sense. It is too tight, too abrupt. The lava should have continued straight. Instead, it turned, as though guided away from something that no longer exists. You follow the curve, descending lower, and the quiet becomes so deep that even imagination feels muffled. Here, in this place, the question that has been rising through every layer of the planet finally gathers enough weight to touch the front of thought. If a world can lose its chronology, if it can forget its own structure and rebuild from fragments, then what force, internal or external, was powerful enough to wipe the slate so clean? The surface holds its silence, but the molten heat beneath seems to shift, like something turning in sleep, carrying the weight of an answer, too vast for the crust to speak aloud. Deep beneath the crust, pressures build and subside in cycles too slow for any human sense, too vast for intuition, but not beyond the reach of equations. There, in the mantle's glow, the story of what happened to Venus is still being written in convection cells and chemical gradients, only we do not yet know how to read it. Two broad categories of explanations rise from human thought. When we ask, what could have reshaped a world so completely? Something from the outside, or something from within? From the outside, we imagine impact. A colossal collision, a body the size of a small moon, striking Venus with enough energy to melt the crust, tilt the axis, slow the rotation, and flood the skies with vapor and debris. Such impacts are not speculation. Our moon likely formed from one. Uranus bears the tilt of another. If Venus suffered such a blow, it could explain much. The reversed spin, the loss of oceans, the destabilization of the crust. But impacts leave scars. Basins, rings, chemical signatures in the mantle. On Venus, the radar maps reveal no unambiguous impact structure large enough to match the required violence. The surface is too young, too smoothed, too thoroughly remade to preserve a basin of that magnitude. An impact that powerful would have imprinted its geometry deep into the interior. Yet our models struggle to reconcile the current mass distribution of the planet with such an event. It is possible, but not satisfying. An explanation that fits only by leaning heavily on what we cannot see. From within, we imagine a different story. A slow intensification of heat as radioactive decay, tidal forces, and trapped energy push the mantle beyond a critical threshold. The crust, thick and stagnant, fails to vent that heat effectively. Over time, stress accumulates until the entire lithosphere destabilizes at once. A global convulsion, a mantle overturn, a catastrophic resurfacing in which ancient crust sinks inward and fresh material rises to bury it. In this version, no collision is needed. The planet destroys its own past under the weight of its internal dynamics, a self-inflicted erasure. This scenario answers some questions. It can produce widespread volcanism, rebuild the surface, release gas that thickens the atmosphere, and possibly alter rotation through the redistribution of mass. But it, too, has gaps. The timing is uncertain. The exact mechanism is debated. Not all features fit neatly within its frameworks. Both narratives impact from without, overturn from within, try to wrap themselves around the same set of anomalies. Neither fits perfectly, neither fails completely, and in that gap between explanations, something new has begun to grow. An idea not of a specific event, but of a process that outlasts any single cause. A process we might call planetary memory drift. It is a way of seeing planets, not as static repositories of their own past, but as systems whose ability to remember depends on their stability. Change a planet gently, and its rocks, ice, and atmospheres retain a layered archive of those changes. Change a planet violently, and the archive burns. What remains afterward is partial, distorted, reassembled. Venus is the clearest example we know of such a drift. In this view, the precise trigger, impact, overturn, runaway greenhouse, matters less than what came after. The point is not only that Venus changed, but that it changed in a way that broke the continuity of its record. Memory drift begins when the conditions that maintain a planet's archive are pushed past a threshold. Oceans vanish, crust melts, atmosphere reconfigures, rotation shifts. Every subsystem that once stored information finds its medium altered. Rocks that bore witness are recycled. Strata that preserved sequence are homogenized. Chemistry that encoded climate is reset. Afterward, the world that emerges may still carry fragments of its former self, in isotopes, in odd terrains, in residual motions, but those fragments no longer align. The planet remembers, but remembers wrong. You drift higher now, as though rising into a vantage point that allows the entire sphere to fit inside your mind. From here, the patterns become more abstract, but also clearer. You can see how the coronae cluster in certain belts, how the tesserae stand isolated like islands of an older age, how the planes wrap around them like a sheet of cooled fire. You can see how the number and distribution of craters conspire to tell you the surface is young, while the bulk of the planet remains ancient. New skin, old bones. Memory drift is not a physical law. It is a lens, a way to describe what happens when a planet's ability to record time is compromised. Earth, by comparison, is a world that remembers in layers. Ice cores, sediment stacks, fossils locked in limestone, zircons that date back almost to the planet's infancy. All of these preserve sequence. Our world forgets locally, but remembers globally. Venus forgets globally and remembers only in scattered, ambiguous pockets. As you hold both worlds in your awareness, the blue one, with its layered archive, the golden one, with its reconstructed shell, a subtle tension begins to form. It is not rivalry. It is not fear. It is something akin to recognition. Because if planetary memory is fragile, then Earth, too, could, in principle, cross a threshold, beyond which its archive collapses. Loss of oceans, overheating of crust, atmospheric transformation. These are not impossibilities. They are pathways, visible in equations, made real in the cautionary tale, radiating from Venus's clouds. The point is not that Earth will become Venus. The point is that Venus shows it is possible for a world to lose the thread of its own story. And once lost, that thread cannot simply be picked up again. We study Venus with radar, spectrometers, thermal imagers, orbital dynamics. We send probes that melt and fail. Within minutes of reaching the surface, their circuits overwhelmed by heat and pressure. They were never designed to survive. Every attempt to listen ends in a kind of silence. Yet even in that silence, the data we bring back is enough to shape a haunting realization. No matter how advanced our instruments become, we may never fully reconstruct the original Venusian world. Too many pages are missing, too many sequences broken, too much of the archive has drifted away from coherence. We can approximate, we can model, we can say, once there were oceans here. We can say, once the atmosphere was thinner, the surface cooler, the rotation different, but we will never know the precise shape of the continents, the exact chemistry of the seas, the detailed history of its storms. We will never know which potential paths were available before the one path that led to annihilation was taken. That uncertainty is not only scientific, it is existential, because planets do not only teach us about themselves, they teach us what can happen to memory on scales larger than any species, larger than any civilization, larger than life itself. You let your breathing slow again, matching the slow backward spin of the planet below. Each breath is a rotation, each pause a long Venusian night. Somewhere beneath the clouds, the rocks remain hot, The air remains thick, the surface remains young and old. At the same time, and in that contradiction, another thought arrives, quiet and steady. Perhaps the true mystery of Venus is not how it changed, but how much of that change will forever remain unknowable. A world that remembers wrong is also a world that will always resist complete understanding. And as that realization settles, it reaches gently for one more connection, the one that arcs from this silent, altered planet back toward the only world we know from the inside, the one still layered with its own unbroken archive, the one that, for now, still remembers in the correct order. The connection is not yet fully formed. It waits, just beyond the edge of this thought, like a bridge not quite finished, a bridge that leads from Venus's distorted memory to the question of what happens when a remembering species begins to alter the memory of its own world. That question hangs there, soft and unfinished, inviting the next descent into both science and reflection, not answered, not avoided, simply waiting in the warm, golden dark. The air thickens again as the drifting perspective lowers, sinking back toward the planet's surface. Not physically, but in understanding. Each descent brings a new layer of contradiction, a new glimpse of a world that seems simultaneously transparent and impenetrable. Venus offers everything to our instruments, yet reveals nothing in sequence. It is like reading a diary, with all the pages out of order, and half the ink melted away. Below, a wide plain extends toward the horizon. Its surface glows faintly in infrared, a heat that has nowhere to go, trapped beneath an atmosphere that acts not just as a blanket, but as a vault, a sealing mechanism that prevents the past from escaping and the present from cooling. Heat on Venus is not weather, it is identity. Here, temperature is not a condition that changes. It is a feature of the planet itself, constant, unwavering, as if the world has chosen one state and refuses to leave it. You drift toward a region flecked with volcanic constructs, the largest almost circular, wide as mountain ranges on Earth, but lacking the peaks and dramatic slopes that would make them look like mountains. They are flattened, bulging, the signature of eruptions that pushed up but did not break free. It is as though the planet exhaled and then held its breath forever. One of these constructs, a broad, gently rising dome, stands out. Its slopes appear unbroken, smooth, in a way that contradicts its immense size. Lava should create texture. Flows should overlap. Collapse pits should pockmark the summit. But radar shows a near-perfect symmetry. Perfection is unusual in geology. Nature produces beauty, but rarely uniformity. Uniformity suggests that whatever created this feature acted everywhere at once, with equal energy, with the same rules. It is the geological equivalent of a single word spoken clearly in a long text of scattered, half-erased sentences. But even this clarity is misleading because the dome has no clear age markers. It could be 300 million years old. It could be 500. It could be younger still. On Venus, youth and antiquity blur. Melted rock hardens into something that carries no timestamp. And that absence, the inability to tell when anything happened, is the deepest part of the mystery. Events lose meaning without order. Memory loses meaning without order. Planets depend on sequence the way living beings do. Remove sequence, and the story collapses into stillness. This stillness is everywhere. Across a strewn field of fractures, rare faults cut through the surface, but they too look arrested, as if they began to move, and then froze in place. Stress built, shifted, chose a direction, and then stopped short of completion. Venus is full of incomplete decisions. The ground radiates heat in slow pulses, a reminder that beneath the rigid crust lies a mantle that has not cooled, that has not forgotten motion. The mantle tries to speak, but the crust above it holds fast. Stiff, younger than it should be, yet too old in spirit, an enforced stillness that denies the planet's internal rhythm. This tension between an active interior and a silent exterior creates anomalies in the gravity field. Subtle dips, unexpected rises, variations that hint at mismatched densities below the surface. These gravity anomalies are some of the most important clues we have because they reveal the presence of enormous structures beneath the crust. Plumes, roots of ancient continents, fragments of old crust, buried under the newer flows. Fragments of the old Venus still exist, but they lie deep, trapped beneath layers that refuse to yield. If the planet could be cracked open, if the crust could be peeled back, like cooled wax, we would see an interior still carrying the architecture of a more complex past. But Venus has no interest in revealing it. The crust is thick. The atmosphere is crushing. The heat denies exploration. Every attempt to land a probe is met with destruction. Within minutes, the planet protects its secrets. By its very nature, as you drift across a wide plateau, the thought emerges again. Not new, but gaining shape, Venus no longer communicates with its earlier self. A world must maintain feedback between layers, between atmosphere and surface, between crust and mantle, between spin and mass distribution. This interplay is what preserves planetary memory. When the interplay is broken, the past fractures. Venus shows fracture in every system: rotation that reversed, atmosphere that thickened catastrophically, crust that melted and reset, hydrosphere that vanished, magnetic field that collapsed, mantle that moves without expression, surface that cools without history. Each subsystem remembers a different version of the planet's life. The mantle remembers mobility, the crust remembers stillness, the atmosphere remembers heat, the winds remember speed, the rotation remembers reversal, the tesserae remember pressure, the craters remember youth, the isotopes remember oceans. None of these memories align. This is not a poetic contradiction. It is a scientific one, a measurable one, a contradiction that cannot be corrected by more data alone because it is built into the nature of the planet. We pass into another region where volcanic calderas sprawl like collapsed lungs. These depressions are vast, tens of miles across, their centers sagging lower than their rims, as though drained of life. A caldera forms when magma withdraws from a chamber beneath a volcano. On Venus, the pattern is similar, but the scale is too large for typical eruptions. These collapse features suggest that reservoirs of magma once swelled beneath the crust in volumes that could reshape continents. Yet the surrounding plains show no corresponding evidence of large, consistent lava outpourings. Where did the magma go? One possibility is that it never erupted, that it rose and fell beneath a crust too rigid for release, a cycle of swelling and collapse that reshaped the subsurface without breaking through the surface. This again points to friction between what the planet wants to do internally and what it is able to do externally. A geological body caught between pressure and constraint. You drift above a caldera rim, watching the patterns of slump blocks, giant pieces of crust that slid inward as the center collapsed. They slide in clean geometry, angles too consistent to be purely random. It is the architecture of a planet in mechanical agony. Yet the agony is quiet, calm, almost serene. This serenity is the part that remains disturbing. Venus is the calmest violent planet we have ever seen. Its destruction is complete, its reconstruction total, its current state unmoving, a final condition from which it does not deviate. Planets do not usually settle like this. They oscillate, they breathe, they cycle. Venus no longer cycles. Its surface is frozen, its atmosphere is trapped, its heat is locked, its memory is fractured, a world in stasis. And as you glide through that unmoving sky, past calderas that do not erupt, across plains that do not age, above a mantle that churns without expression, the next question rises, the one scientists hesitate to ask, because the implications reach beyond Venus itself. If this planet lost its ability to remember its own evolution, then what does it truly mean for a world to forget? Forgetfulness, on a planetary scale, is not absence. It is replacement, a new identity laid atop an old one. A new surface covering old crust. A new atmosphere overriding old skies. A new rotation replacing old spin. A new thermal state replacing old climate. Forgetfulness is not vacancy. It is reconstruction. And in that reconstruction, we must finally ask, is the Venus we see today a final form or merely the first chapter of whatever it became? After the moment its memory collapsed, the planet does not answer, but the silence is full of direction. A silence pointing towards something deeper, buried not in geology, but in the nature of what planets are allowed to become. When continuity fails, and in that direction, something waits. Not an explanation, but a turning point, a shift in perspective that draws us closer to the real question beneath every anomaly. If Venus once walked a path like Earth's, what path is Earth walking now? The question settles into the warm air like a slow falling ember. Not burning, not fading, simply descending through thought, until it rests at the center of awareness. If Venus once resembled Earth, then what exactly prevents Earth from resembling Venus? The surface drifts past beneath you, golden, muted, an entire world shaped not by what it remembers, but by what it has lost. And somewhere inside that contrast, between a world with memory and a world without, lies the quiet, growing unease. That Venus was never meant to be only an object of study. It is also a reflection, held at a distance, showing us what a planet looks like. When the thread of continuity snaps, we move across a plane where the basalt is darker, thicker, as if this region cooled last. In the great planetary reset, the flows overlap in subtle layers, their edges curving gently, like drips of melted wax hardened in place. Each flow is smooth, too smooth, as if the lava spread across a world, already stripped to uniformity. This uniformity suggests something profound. The resurfacing was not only widespread, but ordered. A catastrophic event does not usually create order. It leaves chaos, variation, uneven outcomes. Yet Venus hides chaos behind consistency. A curious paradox. Either the event was unimaginably controlled, which nature rarely is, or the event was so total that no irregularities survived it. Totality leaves no witness. You descend lower. Pressure builds in your imagination, the way it truly builds. On every descending lander, squeezing metal to its limits. Even Venera probes, designed for hell, lived only minutes. Their failure is not a flaw. It is a demonstration. Venus denies permanence. It denies presence. It denies the possibility of anyone touching its surface long enough to learn its secrets. And yet, paradoxically, the planet is full of evidence. So much evidence, but none of it aligned. Below, a long fracture splits the plane. Its walls rise slightly, like lips parted around a word. The planet almost spoke. The fracture curves gently for miles, then disappears under a younger flow. This is a clue. The younger flow hides older motion, but the older motion is only partly visible. A half-remembered sentence. Many such fractures exist. Some form polygonal networks, like cracked glaze on an ancient pot. Others run straight as arrows, defiant in their unnatural geometry. But all of them share one trait. They began under conditions that no longer exist. They are memories, without context. Scientists classify them, measure them, model their possible origins. Compression, tension, mantle plumes, lithospheric flexure. Each idea fits only pieces. None fit all. The trouble is not the features. The trouble is the sequence. The features cannot agree on what happened first. And this disagreement, this impossibility of ordering the past, is what makes Venus a world whose memory has drifted. Imagine holding a book in which the pages reorder themselves. Every time you turn one, imagine trying to understand a story, not because the words are gone, but because their arrangement changes faster than you can read. This is Venus, a story rewritten in heat and pressure, until the plot no longer resembles a timeline. You rise again, seeing the curvature of the horizon through thick orange haze. The super-rotating winds, exert a strange rhythm above the clouds, a 4-day planetary circumnavigation. They move as though remembering, a fast-spinning world that no longer exists beneath them. Above, the atmosphere remembers speed. Below, the crust remembers slowness. In between lies a boundary layer, where these contradictory memories collide but never resolve. This boundary is more than physical. It is conceptual, a divide between two versions of Venus, coexisting but incompatible. When we observe this, a new realization begins to take shape. One subtle, but irreversible. The question is not only what happened to Venus, but how many different Venuses existed? A world before oceans boiled, a world during the runaway phase, a world during global resurfacing, a world after the reset, a world now locked in immobility. Each version overwrote the previous one without preserving its sequence. History shattered into states instead of chapters. From this vantage above the plains, the idea becomes clearer. Venus is a planet in which states remain, but transitions have been deleted. No before, no after. Only the footprints of each era pressed onto a single moment. Below, a ridge begins to rise. Long, gentle, arching like the back of a buried creature. Its symmetry is unmistakable. Its presence feels intentional, even though it is simply geology. But geology, when pushed far enough, begins to resemble intention. This ridge likely formed by mantle buoyancy lifting the crust, a slow swell over millions of years. But the ridge intersects a volcanic plain, with no sign of disruption, meaning the plain came after. But which plain? There are multiple generations of plains, stacked on one another, indistinguishable in composition, impossible to separate chronologically. It is as though Venus rewrote its surface in identical ink, again and again. Each new layer erases the contrast needed to assign order. You drift close to the ridge crest. Radar reveals faint lineations, striations, running along its length. These lines form under intense stress, yet the ridge is too uniform to have experienced stress gradually. Instead, the lines suggest a single overwhelming force, one moment or brief sequence that reshaped the region completely. Earth has nothing like this. At planetary scale, only ice sheets sometimes produce similar patterns. When they surge, sliding over land and erasing everything in their path. Venus is an entire planet that surged, not with ice, but with fire. When the mantle rose, when the crust thinned, when heat soared, the planet entered a thermal runaway, in which every part of it became molten enough to forget what it was, what it had been, how it used to move, how it used to breathe. All that remains are the scars of forgetting. And as these pieces assemble in your mind, a heavier, quieter, more human truth begins to form. Planets do not choose their paths. Physics chooses for them. But forgetting is the result, not of choice, but of thresholds crossed. When enough pressure accumulates, when enough heat rises, when stability fractures just deeply enough, memory drift becomes inevitable. The planet does not fade. It transforms beyond recall. Above the ridge, the wind direction shifts, even though the air is too dense for ordinary turbulence. It is not a storm. It is not weather in any earthly sense. It is simply energy redistributing itself in a world that no longer remembers how to be anything but this. That shift feels symbolic. The slightest gesture toward the next question forming in the silence. A question not yet spoken, but fully alive. If planetary memory can fail, what happens to the life, the climate, the meaning that once depended on that memory staying intact? The thought hangs there, slowly opening, inviting the next descent into what Venus truly has to say about worlds that forget and worlds that still can remember. The haze folds inward as though the atmosphere itself is listening, waiting for something to be admitted, something the planet will not say outright, yet reveals in every contradiction carved into its surface. Below, another plane stretches outward, but this one is different. It carries subtle waves, broad, gentle undulations, almost like the surface of an ocean trapped in stone. These swells are too large to be dunes, Too smooth to be mountains, too uniform to be random. They resemble a memory of motion. In a world where motion has stopped, geophysicists propose that these long waves are remnants of mantle convection, pushing upward in pulses, lifting the crust in vast, slow breaths. But the wavelengths, hundreds of kilometers across, do not match the expected spacing. For a planet of Venus's size and gravity, it is as if the interior tries to speak a language the surface no longer recognizes. We drift lower. The plane reveals faint discolorations, slightly darker regions, where basalt cooled differently, or where thin veneers of ash settled unevenly before being buried again. These variations form patterns that look like shadows cast by events no longer present. One streak curves, then narrows, then vanishes entirely under brighter flows. Buried lava channels, buried vents, buried histories. Venus does not erase things gently. It smothers them, layer upon layer, until identity itself becomes indistinguishable. No planet in the solar system is so committed to uniformity, and that uniformity tells a story, not of stability, but of enforced forgetting, as though the planet reached a thermal threshold beyond which change became too dangerous to allow. You rise slightly, catching the curvature of another dome. This one is older, fractured, its surface split by fine cracks that radiate like crystalline flaws. Here, the crust attempted to expand, but lacked the strength to maintain its shape. It cracked, but did not fully collapse. Again, a half-completed gesture. Everywhere, Venus behaves like a planet that no longer believes in continuation. Processes begin, but seldom finish. Motions initiate, but seldom sustain. Heat rises, but does not escape. Stress builds, but does not release. A world stuck in geological suspended animation. Below, the cracks widen into troughs, long depressions that dip lower than the surrounding plains. Some of them run straight for dozens of miles. Others curve as though guided by the ghost of an underlying structure, a memory of tectonics that has not existed for hundreds of millions of years. These troughs create a strange optical illusion. They feel intentional, not designed, not artificial, but purposeful, as if they reveal the internal skeleton of a world struggling to hold itself together, a skeleton out of alignment. As you drift along the trough, the walls rise steeply on both sides. Radar imagery shows that their angles match fault planes expected, from compression and extension, two opposite forces occurring together in a way that defies simple explanation. This duality, compression and extension, at the same time, suggests that different parts of the crust were responding to different internal memories. One part remembering a world that expanded, another remembering a world that shrank. Neither memory correct, neither memory aligned. Memory drift, written into stone. The trough narrows, then opens suddenly into a circular depression, a collapsed region where the crust gave way, as if pulled into the mantle. These circular pits dot Venus globally, their distribution eerily uniform. Not volcanic craters, not impact craters, but patterns of internal failure occurring at similar depths. Uniform collapse across an entire planet almost never happens naturally. It implies threshold, a limit approached simultaneously in many places, as though the entire crust lost coherence during a moment of planetary crisis. You hover above one such pit. Its rim is scalloped, irregular, but strangely gentle, a sign that the collapse was not violent, but inevitable. Crust that simply could not bear what lay beneath it. Perhaps the rising mantle, perhaps accumulated heat, perhaps the weight of an atmosphere thickening faster than the surface could adapt. Or perhaps something else, something deeper, something tied to the fundamental identity of a planet losing its internal order. The silence presses closer. Even in imagination, the heat feels heavier. Venus is not chaotic. That is the unsettling part. Chaotic worlds still express themselves. Eruptions, quakes, storms. Venus expresses nothing. It endures. A planet can be quiet for two reasons: because it is stable or because it is holding itself together by the thinnest margin. Venus's quiet is not the quiet of stability. It is the quiet of aftermath. You glide farther toward a region where elevated plateaus rise like weathered mesas. But these are not mesas. They are the last survivors of the old highlands, the remnants of a world that existed before the reset. Their edges are jagged, eroded not by wind, but by collapse, by heat-induced sagging, by tectonic motions that no longer occur. Here, on these plateaus, the rock is older, so old, its chemical fingerprints do not match the composition of the surrounding plains. A different crust, a different era, a different Venus, and this is where the truth begins to form more clearly. The planet that exists today is not the direct descendant of the planet that first cooled 4.5 billion years ago. It is a successor, a second version. Venus did not evolve from its early conditions. It transitioned, suddenly, irreversibly, catastrophically, into a new state of being, a second identity, made from the ashes of the first. And when you accept this, when the idea fully lands, a realization blooms slowly behind it. A realization that feels less like knowledge and more like recognition. A world can change so completely that even the laws shaping its past no longer apply to its present. A world can cross thresholds beyond which memory, geological, atmospheric, rotational, cannot follow. A world can become unlike its former self, completely, irrevocably. And as that thought spreads, it calls to another, softer, more fragile, yet impossible to ignore. What if this ability to lose continuity is not unique to Venus? What if every world, under the right pressures, under the right stresses, contains within it the potential to forget? The clouds above swirl, slow but insistent, like the turning of a page, toward whatever question waits to be asked next. The clouds fold in on themselves, slow spirals moving with a rhythm too patient to belong to weather, too deliberate to be dismissed as turbulence. Above them, the super-rotating winds still race, circling the planet every 4 Earth days, an atmosphere that remembers speed, while the world beneath it remembers only stillness. 2 layers, 2 histories, sharing the same sphere, without touching the same truth. And from that dissonance, another realization starts to breathe. Venus is not only a world that forgot. It is a world that remembers selectively, not the whole, but scattered pieces, not the continuity, but shattered images. Memory, fragmented, which raises a deeper question, one that grows heavier, as the drifting perspective carries you toward the horizon. If planets can forget, if they can rearrange their memories, rewrite their surfaces, reverse their rotations, then what else can drift? What else in the universe is vulnerable to the loss of sequence? Below, a subtle change emerges in the terrain. The bright plains darken, transitioning into fractured regions, where long, branching channels intersect like veins carved into the crust. Some channels fork and rejoin, others vanish abruptly beneath resurfaced layers. These are not river valleys. They are lava rivers. Once, they ran red-hot across the planet, carving paths that defy normal flow patterns. Some channels travel uphill, some split without reason, some bend as if pulled sideways by a force acting beneath the crust. Lava does not behave this way, not unless the ground moved underneath it, tilting, warping, sinking, while the flow was still alive. This means the crust reorganized itself. At the same time the lava was cooling, a planet reshaping its geometry, even as it attempted to record it. Memory captured, while memory was collapsing. No wonder the story is incoherent. You drift deeper into the channel field. The ground looks molten, even though it has been solid for hundreds of millions of years. The texture resembles a frozen ocean, waves caught mid-motion, ripples arrested in stone. A world frozen, not by cold, but by heat. Heat that steals sequence. Heat that melts order. Heat that dissolves lineage. In many worlds, heat is a catalyst for change. Here, heat is an eraser. The temperature at your imagined vantage point is enough to release metals from rock, to melt lead, to crush steel through thermal stress alone. Pressure bears down, like the weight of a mountain, pressed against every square inch. Even if the surface were safe to touch, the air would destroy you before you fell. This is not just a hostile environment. It is an environment built to prevent preservation. Nothing fragile survives here. Not water, not ice, not organic molecules, not memory. And yet, something remains. A shape, a line, a ridge, a fractured tessera, a collapsed dome, a misaligned crater. Hints, nothing more, like fossils of thought, left behind by a planet that no longer understands the language they were written in. You drift upward again, into a region where the plains lift subtly, forming vast highlands with smoother textures. These areas, often called terra, represent what could be the last elevated fragments of the ancient crust. Their geometry does not match the lava plains. Their mineral signatures differ. Their inclinations suggest tectonic forces once acted here, forces that do not operate in the Venusian present. This is not erosion, this is contradiction. A world that once had tectonics no longer does. A world that once cooled now overheats. A world that once spun now recoils in the opposite direction. You glide across the highlands. The edges drop sharply into the plains below. Cliffs that form not through weathering, but through collapse. The crust lost buoyancy, sank unevenly, left stair-step edges where ancient terrain met the resurfacing flood. Imagine continents drowning in molten rock, not sinking, not breaking, disappearing. Imagine how many stories disappeared with them. The thought deepens, settling in the warm dark of the Venusian sky. Every world is a storyteller, but not every world retains its stories. Earth speaks in layers. Mars speaks in dust. Mercury speaks in scars. But Venus speaks in absence, not silence. Absence, a difference as profound as forgetting versus never knowing. You drift toward another corona. Its circular outline stretches for hundreds of kilometers, its ridges rising like the rim of an ancient wound. Within the ring, fractures form petal-like shapes, geological flowers that bloom only under cataclysmic conditions. These structures might be the most haunting relics Venus has, expressions of a mantle plume that tried desperately to pierce the crust during the resurfacing cycle, but never fully succeeded. It is as if the planet tried to send a signal upward, a pulse from the interior to announce its transformation, but the crust muted the message into a pattern that looks both beautiful and unreadable. A forgotten page, decorated but incomprehensible. You rise above the corona's rim, and from this vantage, you can see how the fractures radiate outward in nearly perfect symmetry, not random cracking, but an organized failure. Systems fail in patterns when pushed beyond endurance, and Venus was pushed beyond endurance. Heat from within, sunlight from without, pressure building, water escaping, atmosphere thickening, rotation slowing, crust weakening, mantle rising, layers disagreeing, all of it converging into a single moment. When the planet crossed a boundary from which return was impossible, planets do not scream, they break, and in the breaking, memory shatters. A world that once may have resembled Earth now bears no resemblance to anything but itself, and yet the sense of parallel remains. An unease forms, quiet but insistent. If Venus shows what happens when a world loses continuity, what might continuity truly mean on Earth? What anchors Earth's climate from drifting the way Venus's did? What keeps Earth's water stable instead of vanishing? What keeps geological memory layered instead of reset? What keeps rotation steady instead of reversing? What keeps sequence intact? You drift higher, and the whole planet lies below you. A sphere glowing faintly through cloud, a world that has already crossed every threshold that terrifies us. A world that became something else, not destroyed, transformed, not dead, rewritten. And in that transformation, Venus becomes more than an object of study. It becomes a warning written in heat, a testament carved in pressure, a reminder that planetary memory is not guaranteed. a reminder that worlds can forget. The air trembles faintly, as if the planet itself inhales. And somewhere within that trembling lies the next question forming, quiet and relentless. What if forgetting is not the end of a planet's story, but the beginning of a new one? The clouds swirl with heavy grace, as if the entire atmosphere is shifting its weight from one side of the planet to the other. Slow, deliberate, unburdened by the concept of hurry. In this vast stillness, you begin to sense something deeper than heat or pressure, something that feels like inevitability. Below, the highlands fade, replaced once more by endless volcanic plains. But now, in the dim orange glow, their smoothness feels different. Not just the aftermath of resurfacing, but the foundation of a new identity. As though the planet decided, in the silence after catastrophe, that this flat, uniform shell would be the shape of its future self. We drift lower, toward a region where small volcanic domes dot the surface like beads of glass. They rise gently from the plains, perfectly round, as if formed not by explosive eruptions, but by slow, internal swelling. Some crack at the top, others sag inward. Many overlap, like echoes of a process repeating itself. Without variation, repetition is a kind of memory too, but not a good one. Not the memory that evolves, the memory that loops. Venus loops. The domes form, the domes cool, the domes repeat, but the planet itself does not move forward. No new tectonic cycle, no changing climate, no shifting oceans, no seasonal narrative, just heat and pressure and the identical motion of rising magma that never transforms the world in any meaningful way. In geology, lack of variation is as revealing as abundant change. On Venus, uniformity is not stability. It is the silence after every alternative path has been erased. You glide across the dome field, observing how their spacing forms a kind of rhythm, not perfect, not artificial, but suggestive, as if the mantle pulses underneath, with intervals too long for human scales, too short for geological ones. Pulses recorded in stone, pulses recorded in the only way. A planet without continuity can record anything at all. These intervals might be clues to understanding how often Venus attempts to reshape itself, whether the resurfacing was a single event or the largest in a long series of cycles. But whatever the rhythm once was, it is muted now, like a heartbeat slowed past recognition. Far to the west, the ground begins to tilt upwards, a gentle rise, but over hundreds of kilometers, it becomes a towering plateau. This is Aphrodite Terra, one of the largest highland regions on Venus, an exposed remnant of a world that no longer exists. From a distance it looks calm, but radar reveals a tortured surface, ridges crossing at harsh angles, valleys sliced into the crust like surgical cuts, folds that suggest enormous lateral forces, once pushed and pulled the terrain before the planet froze its own evolution. These features indicate that Venus once experienced tectonics, not like Earth's, but tectonics nonetheless. A world that once stretched, compressed, tilted, reshaped itself across vast time. And then, nothing. The motion stopped. The ridges froze. The valleys ceased deepening. The folding halted mid-curve, as though the planet stepped away from its own geological story. Before finishing the sentence, you drift along a ridge crest. It rises sharply, its sides jagged, like a wave of rock suspended at its peak. A crest without a crash. Motion without aftermath. The planet's surface speaks in gestures that lack resolution. Everywhere you look, Venus feels like a conversation cut short. Why did the motion stop? Heat should continue driving them. Pressure should continue deforming the crust. But instead of motion, the crust has become rigid, as if overwhelmed by a final, irreversible transformation that sealed the planet's ability to change direction. This rigidity is not cooling, it is trauma. Planets can be traumatized, not emotionally, but physically, by crossing thresholds that break feedback loops, destroy gradients, erase regulatory systems. On Venus, the moment the oceans boiled, the moment water was lost, The moment the atmosphere thickened into a relentless prison, climate feedback, tectonic breathing, surface evolution, all of it snapped. A world needs contrast to evolve. Hot and cold, wet and dry, high and low, soft and hard. Venus has only one state, extreme, and in that extremity, memory cannot form. Variation is memory. Uniformity is forgetting. You rise again, higher this time, until the thick atmosphere shifts. From crushing to concealing, the planet's dark surface melts into haze. Above, the clouds swirl like massive vortices. Storms that do not bring rain, winds that do not cool. Lightning flickers here, far stronger than Earth's. Electrical storms crackle, like synapses firing in a brain that can only flash, but cannot remember. The atmosphere is alive, with a kind of chemical urgency. Sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, trace gases rising, falling, cycling through reactions. That should indicate ongoing volcanic release. And yet the ground below shows no fresh flows large enough to match atmospheric data. Contradiction again. The signature state of Venus. The air remembers something, the crust does not. New sulfur suggests volcanoes still breathe. Radar suggests the surface does not respond. Gravity data suggests mantle plumes remain active. Heat maps suggest the crust is sealed. The planet behaves like a mind split into parts that no longer communicate. Inside this disconnect, a single question begins forming, one that planetary scientists are cautious even to frame. What if Venus is not done transforming? What if the resurfacing event was not the conclusion, but the beginning of a new cycle that has not yet fully unfolded? The crust could crack again. Stress could accumulate unseen. Heat could build beneath its mask of uniformity. Atmospheric chemistry could shift in ways not yet understood. Rotation could drift by fractions of a degree each century. The mantle could rise in slow, unstoppable plumes, waiting for the threshold when the crust can no longer contain them. Venus is quiet, but not dead. Still, but not stable. Young in surface, ancient in heart. A world that rebuilt itself once and may yet do so again. And in imagining this possibility, the thought widens. If Venus represents what happens when memory collapses, then its current silence may not be silence at all. It may be the long inhale before the next rewriting, a pause between identities, a quiet that precedes another transformation, and in that quiet, another question begins to form. A question shaped not by Venus, but by the resemblance between Venus's forgotten past and Earth's fragile present. What, exactly, is the line between a planet that remembers and a planet that forgets? The line between remembering and forgetting is thinner than anyone imagined. From above, Venus looks eternal, a world locked in its furnace, unchanged for hundreds of millions of years. But nothing in the universe is truly still. Not air, not rock, not memory. Stillness is only motion, too slow for the present moment to perceive. And Venus, despite its silence, is moving toward something. You drift downward once more, into a region where the plains ripple, with long, shallow arcs. Structures shaped by mantle pressure, the slow heaving of a world that refuses to fully die. These arcs, barely perceptible, except through radar, are the quiet signatures of internal persistence. Venus has not finished speaking. It has simply lost the grammar of its earlier voice. We cross into a valley where fractures intersect at angles that seem almost mathematical. Their geometry suggests a past world of stress fields, more complex than anything seen today. But the valley is not old. The fractures do not belong to the Venus that existed. After the resurfacing, they belong to a moment, somewhere between the two eras, a transitional period that left almost no other trace. These fractures are the ghost marks of a world dissolving into another world. In geology, transitions are everything. They hold the story of how one state becomes the next. But Venus's transitions are gone, lost, boiled away. by thermodynamic violence, so complete that even the mechanisms of destruction were destroyed. The valley ends abruptly at a scarp, a towering cliff, hundreds of kilometers long, its face angled like a frozen tsunami. You hover near its edge. The cliff reveals layers, but not in the way Earth reveals layers. Earth's layers tell time. Sedimentation, fossils, volcanic ash, eras stacked like pages. But Venus's layers are smeared, blended, lacking boundaries. The geological equivalent of pages melted together. The cliff shows only one real truth. The world beneath your gaze suffered an event strong enough to erase the distinction between before and after. Its memory melted and reset in one motion. And as you ascend, climbing above the scarp's rim, your viewpoint widens into the rolling expanse beyond. Here, the plains are fractured by long, curved grabens, trenches formed by extension, as if the surface of the planet once swelled outward before collapsing inward again. These structures appear patterned, almost rhythmic, as though the entire region was pulled and squeezed by tides, not of water, but of mantle and heat. Geophysicists propose viscous relaxation, isostatic rebound, delayed lithospheric cooling, but none of those models produce the shape seen here. The trenches curve too smoothly, across too wide an area, their distribution too even. It is not a field of fractures, it is a signature, the signature of a world that was once in motion, then fell out of it. Motion implies memory. Collapse implies forgetting. You drift into the center of the trench field, where the ground sinks just enough to create a basin. Radar shows subtle thermal anomalies. Within the basin, warmer regions that should not exist unless heat is still rising from the mantle below. This means the planet has not finished cooling. The reset was not the end. It was an interruption, a pause. Everything about Venus is an interruption. Rotation interrupted until it reversed. Cooling interrupted until it stagnated. Tectonics interrupted until they froze. Water cycles interrupted until they ceased. Geological sequences interrupted until they lost all coherence. A planet living in aftermath rather than evolution. And yet, beneath the aftermath, the pulse persists. Venus is not stable. It is suppressed. You rise again, this time breaking through the thickest layers of haze toward the blinding high clouds. Sunlight refracts here into muted gold, scattering into amber halos that flicker like memory shards. Above this elevation, the winds scream, not audibly, but in their speed. They whip around the planet at hundreds of kilometers per hour, circling vastly faster than the surface beneath them rotates. This is the atmosphere's rebellion against the stillness below, a preserved motion from an earlier era, a fossil of velocity. Venus remembers its fast rotation only in the sky. The surface remembers only slowness. The mantle remembers only pressure. The crust remembers only collapse. The isotopes remember only oceans. The plains remember only fire. A planet with no single memory. A planet made of disagreements. And in this mosaic of contradictions, a new understanding settles. Venus is not a world with a broken history. It is a world trying to reconcile multiple histories that no longer fit together. Like a mind holding incompatible memories, each insisting it is the truth. Below, the subtle glow of the surface is barely visible through the clouds. It pulses faintly, a reddish echo of heat trapped below, a thermal hum rising through an atmosphere that refuses to let anything escape, including the past. This hum feels like breathing, slow, uneven, not alive, but not dead either. A world in geologic limbo. And from this limbo emerges a thought, quiet but undeniable. The Venus we see today may not be permanent. A planet that rewrote itself once may have the capacity to rewrite itself again. The mantle still moves. The crust still holds stress. The atmosphere still changes. The rotation still drifts. The sulfur cycles still fluctuate. The heat still rises. The anomalies still whisper. The story is not finished. Venus is paused, not concluded. And inside that pause, in the dense, shimmering heat and fractured geological memory, a final realization begins to take shape. A planet that can forget, can also forget again. A planet that can lose continuity once, can lose it twice. And a planet that can drift away from its identity, may drift further still. And as this realization expands, folding across the great sulfur skies, another question gathers itself, with the slow, unstoppable gravity of a world turning beneath cloud. If Venus is not done changing, then what new identity waits beneath its thick atmosphere? And what does a second forgetting look like? The clouds tighten overhead as though the entire atmosphere has drawn one long, heated breath and has not yet released it. The air, dense as liquid, glows with a light that is not illumination, but pressure made visible. In this suspended world, where the present is the only state allowed to exist, you begin to understand why Venus feels less like a planet and more like a threshold, a place where the past fell away, a place where the future has not yet begun, a place caught in an eternal between. Far below, a new pattern begins to reveal itself, not in the geology, but in the deviations from it. There are areas of the surface where the plains ripple strangely, as if disturbed by forces that moved sideways beneath the crust. These zones are neither volcanic nor tectonic in the ways we define such terms. Instead, they appear as if the lithosphere itself shifted laterally, dragged by something deeper. Mantle flow, crustal delamination, a failed attempt at subduction. None of these answers fit cleanly. The features behave like memories of a plate system that Venus no longer possesses, a ghost of tectonics, not active, residual. Imagine a muscle that still twitches long after the nerve is gone. That is how the crust behaves here, not with purpose, but with the inertia of something that once knew how to move. You drift across these strange ripples, watching them fade into smoother terrain. They do not end abruptly. They blur, as though swallowed. By later resurfacing, this blur is important. It is the sign of a world attempting, not entirely successfully, to overwrite its own past. Planets do not forget cleanly. Even Venus, with all its heat and pressure and violence, cannot erase everything. Traces remain, half-melted, interrupted, incoherent. A world can hide its history, but not fully. Not from gravity, not from chemistry, not from the buried whispers of an internal structure that still remembers how different everything once was. We move toward a region where the plains abruptly transition into vast, chaotic terrains, jumbled blocks of crust, shoved together like broken plates of armor. These are called chaos regions, and the name is well earned. Nothing aligns, nothing flows, nothing in this landscape behaves consistently with the areas around it. To a planetary scientist, chaos terrain is a red flag, a sign of instability, collapse, or sudden change. On Venus, it is one of the clearest indications that the crust underwent rapid deformation. In the aftermath of resurfacing, the blocks tilt at odd angles. Some rotated almost completely, as though the ground lifted and twisted, before settling back down into a rough approximation of a coherent surface. This is not the behavior of a world evolving steadily. It is the behavior of a world recovering from something catastrophic, something that shifted its interior enough to break the connection between lithosphere and mantle. This break is not trivial. It is existential. For a planet, the relationship between surface and interior is the relationship between identity and memory. Earth's continents drift because the mantle drives them. Its climate functions because the crust interacts with its atmosphere. Its oceans move because rotation and solar input form stable cycles. Venus has none of these. Its cycles were shattered. Its mantle and crust no longer communicate. Its atmosphere ceased to regulate. Its rotation disconnected from any previous dynamical history. Every subsystem lost touch with every other subsystem. When identity disintegrates, only fragments remain. You drift through the chaos region, feeling the weight of a planet that once knew what it was, a planet with oceans, with cycles, with processes that made sense. Now, all that remains is the record of a world forced to live after the story that defined it ended. Beyond the chaos, another structure rises, a corona so vast, it spans nearly 1,000 kilometers. Its ridges glow softly, in radar reflection, forming a perfect ring around a depressed center. From above, it looks like a scar, left by something trying to break through and failing. Coronal structures are among the clearest signatures of mantle plumes pushing upward. But on Venus, they do not erupt through the crust. They push, but cannot puncture. They rise, but cannot speak. A planet with muted expression, a mantle with sealed lips. Every corona is a sentence that ends without finishing. You drift lower, examining the fractures that radiate outward from the corona. They resemble ripples frozen in stone, the attempt of heat to reorganize matter into something new. But the crust resisted. It resisted so completely that all the plume could do was deform it without breaking it. This resistance tells us that the crust of Venus grew thick after resurfacing, so thick that the mantle below lost its ability to rewrite the landscape, a world too traumatized to change again. Yet beneath that rigidity, the heat remains, the pressure remains, the memory of motion remains, the potential for another reset remains. Venus is not finished. It is waiting. You rise above the corona, gaining altitude until the entire structure shrinks into the vastness of the plains. From here, you can sense how many such structures exist. Dozens upon dozens, like ruptures of a heart that tried repeatedly to express its pressure, its truth, its identity, before falling silent. These are not random, they are signatures of unresolved interior dynamics, silent plumes, suppressed change, interrupted evolution, a planet holding its breath for millions of years. And in the golden haze, one truth becomes unavoidable. Venus is not a finished world. It is an unfinished one, caught midway between two incompatible identities. The world it once was, the world it became, the world it has not yet transformed into. A world living in the pause, between tectonics and stasis, between oceans and deserts, between rotation and reverse rotation, between memory and forgetting. A world suspended between who it was and who it will be. The thought deepens, slow as drifting cloud. If Venus exists in this unfinished state, then perhaps forgetting is not its final condition, but part of a larger cycle we do not yet understand. And once that idea takes shape, another follows. What if planetary evolution includes intervals where memory collapses, not as failures, but as transitions? What if the forgetting of Venus was not its downfall, but its gateway to whatever comes next? The clouds churn softly, and the heat rising from below feels like a whisper, a hint that the next step in Venus's strange, drifting story is still gathering beneath its unmoving crust, waiting for the moment it can no longer be held back. The heat beneath the clouds thickens, not rising, but gathering, as if the entire planet is drawing energy inward for something it cannot yet release. Every kilometer you drift forward feels like drifting deeper into a breath that has been held for far too long. Below, a new pattern emerges in the texture of the plains, a subtle network of fractures that do not align with topography or with known volcanic features. They are directional, running parallel for hundreds of kilometers before fading into smooth basalt. These are wrinkle ridges formed when the crust contracts under broad, uniform compression. But contraction requires cooling, and Venus is not cooling. Not really. Its hellish surface temperature barely changes from pole to equator. Its day-night cycle has no thermal gradient. Its mantle still churns, with a heat budget too high to allow global contraction. And yet, the ridges are real. Another contradiction, another signature of a world whose processes no longer behave like they belong to the same planet. You glide lower, letting the ridges pass beneath you. Each one bends gently, as though acknowledging the curve of the planet, but then straightens again. Stubborn, consistent, like the last remaining memory of a coherent global stress field that no longer exists. These ridges are old, but not ancient. They formed after the resurfacing, but before the crust stiffened fully, a narrow window, a geological heartbeat, in which Venus was still flexible enough to express global forces, but already too damaged to maintain them. A world briefly able to speak before falling silent again. As you follow the ridge network, you begin to see other features, small fractures branching off, fanning outward, hinting at local adjustments. The crust attempted, before giving up entirely. It is the geological equivalent of a mind trying to reconcile scattered pieces of memory. Before accepting that coherence is no longer possible, the ridges end at a wide depression, a basin so shallow it is almost invisible, except in radar contrast. Here, the crust droops, thinner than in surrounding regions. A sagging of the lithosphere, a sign that something beneath it is pushing upward, weakening its integrity. Perhaps a plume, perhaps a thermal anomaly, perhaps the returning echo of instability, long thought extinguished. The basin radiates faintly, with higher emissivity, a sign of younger material, not fresh lava, but a surface altered by chemical or thermal processes. In the recent geological past, recent on Venus, means hundreds of thousands of years, a blink, a breath. If Venus were truly static, nothing here should be young, but something is. A hint that the planet may be starting, slowly, to move again. You rise above the basin, letting its shallow contour recede into the golden haze. Far beyond, a vast rift valley grows visible, a tear in the crust, stretching hundreds of kilometers, its edges pulled apart by forces more powerful than any tectonics Venus possesses today. This valley, named Divana Chasma, is one of the closest things Venus has to a tectonic boundary, but it is not a plate boundary. It is a memory of a plate boundary, a moment when the crust tried to act like Earth's, tried to stretch, open, shift, before the resurfacing destroyed every system required to sustain such motions. What remains is the attempt, a scar of intention. The valley is fractured deeply, its floor sunken, its walls steep and jagged, but too smooth to be ancient. Again, the planet shows youth in precisely the structures that should be oldest, a valley without ancestors. As you move along its length, small faults intersect the main rift, each offset a record of stress pulses the planet cannot explain. Their orientations differ, their depths differ, their implied forces do not match the present-day mantle dynamics. This is the anatomy of a world remembering inconsistently. The crust remembers one era, the mantle remembers another, the atmosphere remembers neither. A planet made of fragments that do not correspond. And then, as you ascend slightly, to take in the full extent of the chasma, a realization unfolds slowly, like heat spreading across metal. Venus does not simply illustrate what happens when memory collapses. It illustrates what happens after collapse, when the system attempts to re-establish order, but does so with missing pieces. Imagine someone trying to walk. After forgetting how balance works, they might move, but the movement would be unstable, incomplete, shaped more by instinct than memory. This is Venus, a planet trying to stand on tectonic legs it no longer possesses. You drift farther, watching the rift thin, until it blends back into young plains. Only then do you notice the faint glow rising through the thick air, a band of thermal emission, subtle enough to escape early surveys, loud enough to be unmistakable now. Warmth, fresh warmth, possibly from ongoing volcanism, possibly from mantle upwelling, possibly from the early beginnings of another cycle. This is the moment when something shifts in perception. Venus is not dormant. Venus is recovering, slowly, blindly, clumsily, but recovering. A planet that survived the annihilation of its first identity, now groping toward the formation of a second. Not the Venus that once had oceans, not the Venus that melted itself, not the Venus that froze in resurfaced stillness. A new Venus forming, in its fractured memory, in its mismatched motions, in its suppressed heat, in its rising plumes, in its drifting rotation, in its unstable atmosphere. A world with no continuity still possesses direction, and in that direction, the next question flickers into existence. A question shaped not by catastrophe, but by evolution. If Venus is beginning to move again, what kind of world is it trying to become? A question not of destruction, but of emergence, and the quiet possibility that forgetting might not be the final word in a planet's story, but the first step in the creation of a new one. The glow rising from the plains fades slowly as you drift higher, but the impression it leaves, that subtle warmth, that quiet pulse, stays with you, not because it is bright, but because it is new, a newborn signal from a world long believed incapable of novelty. The air thickens around you once more, cloud layers folding inward, like curtains drawn across a stage, where the next act has not yet begun. But beneath those curtains, beneath the weight of sulfuric haze, and 90 times Earth's pressure, you can feel it, the stirring of a planet that may be waking from its long stillness, not violently, not dramatically, but inevitably. The drifting perspective takes you across a boundary you cannot map on any chart, not geographic, but conceptual. Here the surface changes character, not in form, but in implication. What once looked like stagnation now reads like incubation. The plains are not merely flat, they are settling. The rifts are not merely scars, they are seams. The coronae are not failed eruptions, they are signals of pressure building. The dome fields are not geological leftovers, they are early expressions of something preparing beneath the crust. This shift is subtle, yet profound. It is the moment in the story where the planet stops being a relic and starts becoming a process. You descend toward a circular depression, a volcanic caldera, but one with no obvious vent, no central cone, no lava flows radiating outward, just a wide, quiet bowl with fractured edges and a floor that reflects faintly. In the radar spectrum, something warmed this place, something changed it, something recent. Recent on Venus means the planet's silence has already begun to break. The fractures here are sharp, younger than the plains, narrow, deep. They cut across the surface in straight, persistent lines, far cleaner than the older breakage left from the resurfacing. A new tectonic language, spoken softly, in precise strokes of stress. Venus is beginning to murmur. You drift along one fracture, watching it shimmer faintly with thermal emission. Temperatures fluctuate by a few degrees, small but meaningful. Variation is life. Variation is memory. Variation is motion. This is motion returning. The crust shows it, the atmosphere hints it, the mantle drives it, all out of sync, yet all beginning to tilt toward possibility again. Below, the fracture widens and bends, forming a shape that resembles the early stages of a rift, not a full chasma, not a tear, but an opening gesture, like the first word, from someone who has not spoken in ages. And for a moment, you can almost feel the old Venus beneath, the one with tectonic ambition, with circulation, with gradients, with balance, a memory not erased, but dormant. The drifting view takes you higher, over a broad mesa, with fractured edges, that peel like pages from a thick, ancient book. These edges tilt downward, at angles that do not match the planes that buried them. This is the crust lifting, just barely, at the margins. Around Earth's continents, such uplift would herald plate collision. On Venus, it heralds something else. Internal reorganization. A world does not need plates to rearrange its identity. It needs heat, pressure, and imbalance. Venus has all three. Beneath these mesas, gravity data reveal dense structures rising from the mantle, roots of ancient highlands, and new plumes swelling upward. The plumes do not erupt, not yet. But they exert pressure. They reshape weight distribution. They alter stress fields. They push upward, like slow thoughts, rising toward consciousness. And this realization arrives gently, with the weight of something inevitable. The interior of Venus has not accepted the stasis of its surface. The planet is negotiating a new equilibrium, not the one that melted its oceans, not the one that froze its tectonics, not the one that sealed its atmosphere. A different one, formed in tension between what remains and what is emerging. You drift across a long, shallow rift that widens with each kilometer. Its floor is dark, its edges sharp, its orientation aligned with deeper mantle structures, mapped only indirectly through seismic and gravitational modeling. This is not old stress. This is new stress. Stress means the crust is moving again, slowly, but unmistakably. Something beneath the planet is pushing upward with renewed determination. Perhaps a single plume, perhaps many, perhaps the early rise of a new global cycle. The idea settles in softly, but changes everything. The resurfacing that erased Venus may not have been the planet's final transformation. It may have been its previous one, the first forgetting, not the last. In this light, the patterns across the plains become something different, not static, but paused, not dead, but waiting, not hopeless, but pregnant with potential, the same way a cooling crust on a young world hints at the tectonics that will follow. You drift toward the night side, where the clouds darken, but do not cool. Even in shadow, the temperature remains nearly uniform, a reminder of the planet's refusal to generate gradients. But as you cross into deeper darkness, infrared mapping reveals tiny fluctuations, pockets of warmth, zones of slightly higher emission, patterns too localized to be atmospheric noise. These are geothermal signatures, tears forming. Beneath the silence, perhaps the crust is thinner here. Perhaps mantle plumes rise closer to the surface. Perhaps the planet's long-held pressure is beginning to concentrate in predictable places. A prelude, a boundary, a hint. You rise into the cloud decks again, where winds circle the planet with impossible speed. Their persistence is astonishing. Their direction, perpendicular to the planet's own slow rotation, is a fossil of dynamical behavior that Venus no longer performs. But the winds do not slow. They do not forget. They hold a memory. The crust cannot. Atmosphere remembers. Crust resists. Mantle insists. Rotation drifts. Each layer of Venus is an instrument, playing a different era of the planet's life. And somehow, in this discord, a new harmony is beginning to form. Not the harmony of a stable world, but the harmony that precedes upheaval. A world poised on the threshold of another becoming. And as the clouds swirl around you, as the heat pulses upward through fractured plains, as the mantle's slow rise becomes impossible to ignore, the next question emerges, softly, but with the weight of planetary truth. If Venus is preparing to transform again, what kind of world will rise from the second forgetting? And what will it remember of the first? The clouds dim to a deeper amber, as if the entire sky has thickened in thought. There is a gravity to this moment, not the physical kind, but the gravity of realization, the sense that a world long assumed finished is gathering itself for something unspoken. Beneath you, the plains stretch outward once more, but their meaning has changed. They are not simply smooth. They are expectant, not simply quiet. They are listening. Every fracture, every dome, every subtle uplift now feels less like a remnant and more like a rehearsal, a preparation for the next movement in a symphony interrupted long ago. You descend toward a region where the plains grow mottled, the radar brightness shifting slightly between adjacent patches. These mosaics look insignificant to the eye, but chemically, they reveal something important. The surface is reacting, not fast, not dramatically, but reacting nonetheless, interacting with the atmosphere, recording microscopic exchanges between gas and rock. Sulfur compounds embed in minerals, Trace elements shift oxidation states, textures alter subtly. As the environment continues to evolve, this is change. Slow, almost imperceptible, but real. A planet that truly died would not show this. A world frozen in geological stasis would not adjust its chemistry in patterns that spread across hundreds of kilometers. You rise again, allowing the mottled plains to flow beneath your vision like drifting sandbanks. Ahead, a line of volcanic edifices cuts across the terrain, not high, not explosive, but inarguably young. They resemble the marks left by a hand pressing upward from beneath, testing its strength, finding the crust still resistant, yet not unbreakable. On Earth, these features would be called shield volcanoes. On Venus, they are quieter, less dramatic, but strangely persistent. Their distribution suggests a mantle source that has not faded, a pulse, a reminder, a promise. One volcano in particular draws your attention. Its slopes shimmer faintly in thermal mapping, not hot, but warmer than they should be. In Venusian terms, this is shouting. Heat is the planet's last remaining messenger, and here it speaks of something happening beneath the crust. Right now, geologists debate these anomalies. Some propose that they are remnants of older eruptions, slowly cooling. Others argue that the heat signatures are too localized, too patterned, too recent. If they are right, then Venus is erupting. Not violently, not globally, but enough to matter. Enough to demonstrate that the interior has begun, to test the boundaries of its confinement. The thought ripples outward. A planet that once forgot itself may be ready to remember. In a different way, you drift along the flank of the volcano, watching faint channels curve outward, narrow, uncertain paths, like the first thoughts of a mind recovering from amnesia. The channels are shallow, their edges soft, their directions hesitant, tentative expressions of a world relearning motion. Beyond them, a broad plain rises into gentle hills. These hills are strange, too broad to be volcanic, too smooth to be tectonic. But gravity data reveals something startling, a massive upwelling below, a plume, not dead, not dormant, not remnant, active. An active plume, rising beneath a silent crust, is the clearest sign that a planet is preparing for structural change. Plumes reshape worlds. They raise continents, they fracture plates, they thin lithospheres, they spark eruptions, they rearrange mass distribution, they alter rotation. A plume is not merely heat, it is direction. And Venus, long believed directionless, has direction again. As the realization settles, the sky around you feels heavier, as if acknowledging the magnitude of what this means. Below, the hills rise higher, and the radar reflections shift subtly, suggesting rock that has been altered more recently than the plains, not molten, but reheated, recrystallized, reset on a small, local scale. This is memory returning, grain by grain. You lift above the hills and see something remarkable, a long, linear depression with fresh edges, its walls smooth, its geometry too clean to be ancient. A new rift is forming, not from global forces, not from catastrophic upheaval, but from internal pressure, slowly overcoming the rigidity of the crust. A new sentence in the planet's fractured language. It may never grow large, it may never mirror Earth's plate boundaries, but its existence proves something profound. Venus is no longer only a planet that forgot, it is also a planet that is trying to change again. The rift widens as you follow it. Its floor dips in gradients that do not match the surrounding terrain. This implies movement, recent movement, not from lava, but from flexure. The crust bending, adjusting, responding, because something beneath it is insisting on being remembered. A plume, a region of rising heat, a zone of concentrated buoyancy, a trigger waiting for its moment. Even the atmosphere reflects this deep tension. Sulfur dioxide levels fluctuate in cycles lasting only years, far too short to be remnants of ancient eruptions. These spikes are the coughs of a planet stirring. The clouds are witnesses. Their chemistry reacts to anything that escapes from below. Every molecule of sulfur dioxide that rises comes from the interior, from rock that was heated not long ago. Venus is breathing, even if only faintly. And as you rise higher still, the clouds part just slightly, revealing a dim glow on the horizon. A horizon that should be uniform, but is not. A region warmer than the plains. A region whose contours ripple with heat that cannot be accounted for by sunlight alone. A volcanic field, quiet, but not inactive. A field like this signals the possibility of a new resurfacing cycle in its earliest phase. Not global, not catastrophic, not yet. But cycles begin small. A few eruptions, a few rifts, a few fractures, a few plumes. Then pressure builds. Stress reorganizes. Atmosphere shifts. Crust thins. Cycles accelerate. Memory reorganizes. You hover above the warm region, feeling the weight of a planet poised between what it was and what it will be. And in this moment, filled with the tremor of a world preparing to decide itself again, one thought crystallizes. A thought that belongs not to geology, but to something deeper. If Venus is changing again, if it is preparing a second transformation, then perhaps its next identity will not resemble the one it lost, or the one it became, but something entirely new, something the solar system has not yet seen, a world rewriting itself, not from memory, but from possibility. And as this truth settles, the next question approaches, slowly, like heat rising from the mantle. When a planet rewrites itself, what, if anything, does it choose to keep? The clouds tighten again, as though the entire sky is drawing closer to witness what the planet is becoming. In this pressure-heavy quiet, the idea of choice, a strange word for a world of rock and fire, begins to feel less metaphorical and more like the only way to describe what Venus does now. Because beneath you, the surface is not uniform, not anymore. Patterns once dismissed as noise begin to reveal intention, not conscious intention, but physical intention. The intention of a system, trying to stabilize, trying to reorganize, trying to find a structure that can hold after everything else has failed. The warm volcanic field beneath you, still faint, still smoldering in a way only radar can see, is not isolated. It is part of a larger alignment, a line, a diagonal corridor of heat, stretching across hundreds of kilometers. On Earth, such alignments often mark mantle plumes or hotspot chains. On Venus, they mean something deeper, a continent trying to be born. Under a crust that no longer remembers how to make continents, you drift along this thermal line, and the ground texture changes, becoming rougher, less glassy, more variegated. Subtle rises form patterns, arcuate, overlapping ridges, like slow waves frozen in lava. These waves betray movement underground, upward force, buoyant magma, a planet whispering through deformation. The crust here is thin, thinner than much of Venus, not by much, but enough. Enough for the mantle's heat to leave fingerprints. You are now gazing upon one of the most important features a geologist can find on any world: instability. Instability means possibility. A stable world cannot reinvent itself, but Venus, no matter how still it seems, is unstable in the deepest sense. Not random, not chaotic, just unresolved. The surface ahead darkens, forming a shield-like pattern, with faint lobes radiating outward. These lobes are fresh enough that their boundaries reflect radar, in crisp, unexpected lines. Here, lava once traveled, in thin sheets, not explosive, not violent, but persistent, focused. A plume fed this, not ancient, not mythical, a plume active. In the geological breathing space between the world Venus was and the world it is becoming, scientists argue about whether Venus is volcanically alive. Some say the signals are ghostly, others say they are undeniable. But here, as you drift above the lobes, the truth becomes quiet and clear. Venus is not dead, it is restrained. A world that died would not generate new rock. A world that died would not warm patches of crust in irregular rhythms. A world that died would not fracture in patterns that mirror deep mantle structures. Venus is alive, but sealed, and seals break. As you glide further, the ground begins to show a faint, sinuous pattern. A collapsed lava tube, its roof long since caved in. Lava tubes are rare on Venus. The heat and pressure make their formation difficult. But this one exists, a long, delicate scar, where molten rock once flowed. Under insulating ceilings, before the ground above weakened and fell, lava tubes mean sustained flow. Sustained flow means consistent heat. Consistent heat means there is a source. Ongoing, persistent, deep. Inside the collapsed tube, radar picks up irregular blocks, tilted at different angles, as though the collapse happened in multiple stages. Stages, not a single event, not a sudden break. A sequence. A sequence on Venus. One of the rarest things of all. It is like finding a sentence that survived the burning of a library. You drift beside the reel, watching its floor curve and narrow as it disappears beneath a younger flow. That younger flow is smooth, so smooth it must have covered the collapse soon after it formed. Two events, close in time, different in texture, overlapping. For a moment, just a moment, you are no longer seeing a static world. You are seeing a timeline. A timeline, fragmented but real, in a world famous for having none. Venus is remembering again. Not clearly, not completely, but enough. Enough to show that the planet's identity is not fixed. In the furnace shell we see today, the drifting carries you higher, over a region where plateaus meet plains, in jagged edges, not the smooth, forgiving lines of heat-softened terrain, but sharp boundaries, where crust collided, lifted, broke, then froze mid-motion. The geometry is unmistakable. Venus tried to make tectonics again. It failed. But the attempt is written in the rock. A world does not attempt to process. It has no memory of. These motions, however faint, however incomplete, are echoes of an earlier Venusian identity. Once a planet remembers a motion, it may try to repeat it. Not perfectly, not effectively, but instinctively. And a new question emerges, soft at first, but heavy with implication. What if Venus is not drifting randomly? What if it is drifting toward the closest thing it can find to the identity it once lost? Maybe not oceans, maybe not continents, maybe not rotation like Earth's, but movement, flow, stress cycles, mantle surface communication, volcanic renewal, memory, not as chronology, but as insistence. The mantle does not know the past. In stories, it knows the past. In patterns, and patterns can return. You drift toward the horizon where the clouds shimmer with faint electric discharges, lightning born of sulfur vapor and thermal imbalance. These storms carry chemical signatures that fluctuate in cycles, short cycles, years, months. Cycles mean rhythm. Rhythm means change. Change means the atmosphere is no longer as fixed as once believed. And sitting inside that revelation is a truth almost too quiet to name. The planet may be trying to build gradients again. Gradients are memory, temperature differences, pressure differences, chemical differences, differences that allow history to accumulate. Instead of reset, in the swirling ochre sky, something vast is stirring, not violently, not fast, but undeniably. And as you watch the lightning flicker through the thick clouds, the next question unfurls, with the slow grace of a rising plume. If Venus is beginning to develop new gradients, new motions, new rhythms, then what will it become when its second story finally begins? The clouds churn with a strange, deliberate elegance. Not chaotic, not random, but patterned, as if the atmosphere itself is remembering how to move with purpose. Below, the surface darkens again, flattening into a broad expanse. broken only by faint ridges and occasional thermal glimmers. This is the quietest part of Venus, and also the most deceptive, for beneath this apparent calm lies the deepest tension of all, a world preparing itself for the possibility of motion. You drift closer to the ground, touching the threshold, where the atmosphere becomes heavy enough to crush metal. The air thickens until it can almost be felt, even in imagination. The density of 90 atmospheres, pressing downward, like the memory of 1,000 forgotten storms. And then, ahead, you notice something subtle, but unmistakable, a pattern of cracks, forming a long, sinuous chain. Not old, not from the ancient resurfacing. These cracks cut across young plains, with crisp edges that haven't yet softened. Under chemical weathering, a fresh wound. It curves gently across the terrain, intersecting older features, without being deflected by them, a sign that the force which created it was coherent, persistent, recent, a new tectonic gesture. This is not random fracturing. This is directional stress. The crust is responding to something pushing upward, or outward, or both. For a long moment, you hover there, in the stillness of unbearable heat, feeling, without touching, the meaning behind this subtle line. The planet is shifting, not violently, not globally, but unmistakably. A world that once forgot is now beginning to remember motion. You follow the crack onward. It widens, narrows, splits, joins again, like the hesitant handwriting of someone relearning a familiar script. After centuries of silence, eventually, it leads you to a broad, circular structure. Another corona, but unlike the older ones, with their chaotic centers, this one is clean, geometrically intact, its fractures fine and evenly spaced. This corona is young, younger than the plains around it, younger than the tesserae, younger than the dome fields. A new plume, a new pulse, a new expression of interior heat, forcing its way upward. Controversial as the idea is, the evidence points gently, inevitably. Venus is entering the earliest phases of a new resurfacing cycle, not the catastrophic kind that melted continents and erased oceans. Not yet, but cycles always begin small. A vent here, a fracture there, a plume swelling, a rift widening, a field warming, a planet reorganizing. As you drift above the corona, you notice something else, a change in the atmosphere above it. Sulfur dioxide concentrations rise slightly over this region, forming faint plumes that disperse into high winds. Tiny variations, but too consistent to be random. The atmosphere is reacting to something below. This is the beginning of coupling. Mantle to crust, crust to air, air to chemistry. The first steps toward restoring a relationship that was severed hundreds of millions of years ago. It will take ages for such signals to become obvious, but systems do not change by leaps alone, they change by whispers, and Venus is whispering. You drift higher, crossing a boundary where the atmosphere stabilizes into organized flows. At this altitude, super rotation dominates, winds screaming around the planet, unaware of the stillness below. But even here, in the frenetic sky, something has changed. Chemical mapping shows tiny periodic fluctuations in sulfur compounds, not random bursts, not noise, but cycles, patterns that repeat over months or years. This means the atmosphere is no longer behaving like a sealed, stagnant shell. It is beginning to act like a dynamic system again, a system willing to record change. For the first time in hundreds of millions of years, Venus is forming gradients, temperature, chemistry, circulation, the foundations of a climate, with the capacity to evolve. You drift above the cloud tops now, the entire planet glowing beneath you, like a smoldering ember. In this view, the questions shift. They stop being geological, they stop being chemical, they become something else, a merging of science and wonder. If the atmosphere is stirring, and the crust is straining, and the mantle is rising, and the surface is warming in places where warmth should not exist, then Venus is not a static world. Venus is between states, between destruction and emergence, between collapse and reconstruction, between forgetting and whatever comes after forgetting. It is a world rewriting itself in slow, heated silence. And in the presence of this truth, another realization unfolds, one that feels like the softest pressure. Against the edge of thought, Venus may not be trying to return to what it once was. Memory does not restore itself. Identity does not revert. Trauma does not reset cycles to their earlier states. Instead, systems form new patterns, new rhythms, new forms of equilibrium. Venus is not healing. Venus is becoming. And this becoming is the part we rarely consider, because we are so used to speaking of Venus as something lost. Lost oceans, lost climate, lost habitability, lost memory. But what if the loss was only the first half of its story? What if forgetting is the condition required for the next version of the planet to emerge? If so, then the faint rifts, the young coronae, the localized warmth, the atmospheric cycles, all of these are not warnings of collapse, but signals of transition, not back, forward. And as this understanding deepens, you feel the planet shift, not physically, but perceptually. It is no longer merely a cautionary tale of overheating and loss. It is a demonstration of how worlds can cross thresholds, fracture identity, erase continuity, and still find a way to continue. Venus is not finished. Venus is becoming something unprecedented. And with this recognition, the next question opens. Soft, vast, like a horizon unfolding inside the mind. If Venus is forming a new identity from the remains of its forgotten past, then what shape will the third version of this world ultimately take? And what story will it tell when it begins to remember again? The horizon dims into a muted gold, and beneath the weight of the clouds, Venus begins to show a pattern that is not obvious at first glance. It is subtle, a trembling in the logic of the land, a soft disagreement between what the surface shows and what the planet should remember. As you drift lower, wide plains stretch out in every direction, smooth enough to resemble oceans petrified mid-wave. But the closer you come, the more their perfection breaks apart. Lava flows overlap in layers that look stratified from above, but whenever you follow one, its history vanishes into another. With no clear beginning, no clean line of succession, it is as though the planet keeps repeating the same gesture without preserving any trace of the gestures before it. A surface without a timeline is a strange thing. A surface that imitates one without truly having it is stranger still. You drift over darker flows. Their edges glisten in radar echoes. Young, yes, but young in a way that feels rehearsed. One flow cuts across another, yet the chemical signals do not differ enough to mark different ages. Events separated by millions of years should look different, carry different isotopic scars, different cooling histories. But here, everything carries the same temperature of memory, as if time itself refuses to organize the surface. A world that does not know before cannot know after either. Far ahead, a scattering of fractures begins to appear. Thin, deliberate, like handwriting across stone, they curve around invisible shapes, as if reacting to something buried long ago. Yet the crust below is too young to hold such ghosts. The fractures behave as though obeying an older architecture, one that no longer exists. Patterns from a memory that should not be here anymore. You rise, and the fractures expand into ridge belts, long arcs of compressed crust that bend with planetary force, but refuse to form mountain chains. They look like frozen tides, caught at the moment they gathered strength, but were denied the chance to break. This is where the planet feels most like a contradiction. Every ridge says the crust once strained forward, and every plain says the crust never moved. Every fragment speaks with confidence. None of them agree. The more closely you watch, the clearer it becomes that Venus is not simply missing its past, It is remembering in pieces, sharp, isolated, and mutually incompatible. One elevation hints at uplift, that never completed. A fracture suggests tension, that never resolved. A corona reveals pressure, that never erupted. The planet behaves as if several different histories were pressed into the same ground, without any of them allowed to dominate the story. No sequence survives, only states. You drift into a region where the crust ripples in broad, gentle folds. They feel wrong, not because they exist, but because they belong to no known era. Too young to be remnants of the ancient Venus, too old to match the younger planes. Their age is an argument the planet has with itself. Here, even gravity disagrees. Measurements reveal hidden densities below, shapes that behave like buried continents, yet the surface above them shows nothing of the mountains or basins they should have formed, as though the planet swallowed whole the structures that once defined it and smoothed the surface after, to hide the drama beneath. Nothing aligns, not the chemistry, not the elevation, not the fractures, not the stress fields. Venus does not display a broken narrative. It displays several narratives, laid on top of one another, without transition, and within those contradictions, a quiet and unsettling idea emerges, not loudly, but like heat rising through stone. Perhaps the planet did not merely lose its past, perhaps it was forced to create a new one. You float above the ridge belts, and the clouds thicken again, their swirling patterns echoing the confusion below. The air is so heavy that it presses the landscape into a kind of monotone, blurring details that would tell a coherent story on any other world. But even the clouds cannot hide the truth forming beneath them. The surface does not behave like the record of a world. It behaves like the reconstruction of a world. Everywhere you look, Venus is composed of answers to questions no longer asked. Volcanic features without eruption sequences, uplifts without tectonic motion, heat signatures without volcanic chains, pieces of a memory whose order has been erased. The drifting perspective slows. As the sky grows darker, you feel the shift, not in temperature, but in understanding. Something beneath these mismatched fragments binds them together, not a story, a condition, a state. A planet enters when its history collapses, and it must build itself anew from whatever fragments remain. Venus is not chaotic, it is overwritten, and in this realization, the path ahead opens toward a question that feels almost too large to form in words. What force reshapes a planet so completely that its own surface remembers the past only in broken, incompatible pieces? The clouds curl inward, as if protecting the answer, and the chapter falls away, without ending, sliding into the next breath, the next descent, the next layer of the mystery, waiting beneath the glow. The clouds part just enough to let a muted glow spill through, and in that softened light, Venus shifts again, not in terrain, but in meaning. The closer you drift, the more the planet feels like a vast archive, whose pages were soaked, burned, scraped clean, then written over, before the ash had cooled. Yet beneath the new writing, the old letters still press upward, in faint, distorted relief. You descend slowly, letting the haze thicken around you, until the surface appears as a dark, trembling silhouette. The plains widen, featureless at first, but soon interrupted by a pattern of long depressions, not deep enough to be true valleys, yet too wide to be mere fractures. They resemble old riverbeds, but rivers never flowed here. No water carved these, no erosion smoothed them. They are the shadows of forces that once acted with such intensity that the crust yielded, shifted, and sagged. Before hardening again, you glide above one of these depressions, and something subtle becomes clear. They do not match the slope of the terrain. They curve with a logic that ignores gravity. Some run gently uphill, defying every rule of fluid or tectonic behavior. This is not geology. This is memory. A memory displaced. It is the physical echo of a world reshaped so fast that its crust did not have time to reset its orientation. Before it cooled, the land remembers a gradient that no longer exists, a valley without a source, a direction without a cause, a remnant of a world that rotated differently, tilted differently, breathed differently, before the resurfacing erased the context that made it true. You rise again, the depression shrinking beneath you, until it becomes a faint line, lost in the uniform plain. Ahead, a great plateau emerges, one of the last remnants of the pre-reset Venus. Its edges are jagged, tilted, scalloped by the collapse of weakened lithosphere. These highlands are the closest thing this world has to an intact fossil. Their composition differs entirely from the younger basaltic plains. Their density is higher, their mineral structure older, their internal stress patterns a map of wounds inflicted long before the resurfacing drowned the rest. But moving over their ridges, you see something stranger still. The highlands remember a world that no longer exists. The plains remember a world reborn from molten rock, and the fractures that cut across both remember neither. Three memories, three incompatible versions of Venus, pressed into the same crust. A planet that cannot forget completely, yet cannot remember coherently. You drift across the plateau, letting your gaze follow the tangled ridges. Some run parallel, some intersect at harsh angles, as if shaped by entirely different forces. Despite standing only kilometers apart, such inconsistency should not survive. On a world this hot, this dynamic, heat should erase detail, pressure should homogenize, volcanism should reset, but the plateau resists. It resists the same way. Old scars resist healing, not by choice, but by depth. Nothing else on Venus has endured long enough to contradict the resurfacing. But these regions did. They survived the forgetting. Even so, they are not intact. Their patterns show compression in directions that no longer apply. Some regions are stretched, as if pulled from within. Others are folded in ways that could only result from tectonics this planet no longer has. They are relics of a geological system that was extinguished, not evolved. The plateau narrows. A cliff drops sharply into younger plains below. The contact between them is abrupt, unnatural. On Earth, such a boundary would mark millions of years of erosion or deposition. Here, it marks a single event, sudden enough that two planetary identities stand side by side without blending. The contrast is not simply physical, it is conceptual. A world split between who it was and who it became. You let yourself drift outward again, and as the horizon widens, the contradiction grows more pronounced. The highlands and plains do not oppose each other. They ignore each other. Each follows its own logic, its own history, its own laws. No continuity, no inheritance, only coexistence of incompatible worlds. And in this silence, this soft, heavy, otherworldly quiet, a realization takes shape. What happened on Venus was not a transformation, it was a replacement. The planet did not change, it restarted. Every system, geology, atmosphere, rotation, was thrown past a threshold where it could no longer maintain the thread of its own story. Identity broke, and when identity breaks, what follows is not evolution, but reinvention. You drift above the divide, watching the younger plains hug the edges of the ancient plateau. Like cooling wax poured around stone, the lines between them are so sharp, they feel almost deliberate. From here, a question rises, quiet, slow, inevitable. If a planet can lose its history and become something new, what remains of the world that existed before? Does anything persist after such a rewriting? Chemistry, perhaps. Texture, fragments of structure, ghosts of old stress fields, hints in isotope ratios, footprints in topography. But these are not memories, they are residues. Venus remembers nothing fully, and yet it cannot forget completely. The planet holds only partial truths, shards of former identities, echoes of multiple epochs. compressed into one. A world not with a past, but with remnants of pasts. And as you rise into the thickening clouds, letting the highlands disappear into golden vapor, another question waits. A question that feels like the threshold to the next descent. If Venus could remake itself once, not from choice, but from pressure, heat, and collapse, then could it remake itself again? And if it does, what kind of world will it become the next time its memory breaks? The horizon softens again, dissolving into muted amber as the winds above thicken into a slow, deliberate spiral. Something in the air feels newly organized, as if the planet has begun rehearsing motions it once understood instinctively. The clouds shift in layered bands, forming gradients too subtle to belong to chaos. They're not stable, not yet, but they carry the early outline of a system learning to breathe again. Beneath that swirling sky, the crust stirs in its own quiet language. Heat rises through places once sealed. Stress fields, long, fragmented, mismatched, incoherent, begin to align in ways that do not belong to the Venus we know. Lines of tension stretch across the plains, faint but consistent, pulling the surface toward new geometries. It is the smallest hint of coordination in a world long defined by disarray. A plume swells far beneath the crust, pushing upward with a patience that spans millions of years. It doesn't break through, it doesn't erupt, but its pressure bends the lithosphere just enough for the surface to remember what uplift feels like. Uplift, even in miniature, is a sign of direction, a sign that the interior is no longer content to remain silent. The winds above respond, not strongly, but perceptibly. Their flows tighten around the planet's equator, as if rediscovering a pattern left behind by a rotation that once moved faster, cleaner, more confidently. Trace gases begin shifting in cycles, small oscillations in sulfur dioxide, the kind that suggest new pathways for heat exchange. Tiny variations, meaningless on any other world, but here they glow like the syllables of a rediscovered sentence. The surface, however, still carries contradictions. Rifts open along curves that defy gravity. Flows overlap without sequence. Ancient fragments cling to younger crust without accepting its story. It is a world assembling itself without instructions, gathering pieces that don't fit, yet fitting them anyway. A world relearning form. A depression widens beneath you, shallow, warm, restless. The ground here carries thermal pockets that pulse with a rhythm too consistent to be left over heat. If you could listen beneath the rock, you might hear a slow circulation returning, a memory of mantle motion suppressed but not destroyed. The crust bends, not enough to break, but enough to feel the thought of breaking. Motion is not the same as movement, but motion is the beginning. The clouds swirl into long tendrils that stretch eastward, forming patterns eerily reminiscent of jet streams on Earth. They are not as stable, not as cold, not as global, but they're oriented. Orientation is a kind of memory, one step removed from intentionality. Something in the atmosphere is learning again how to obey gradients instead of smothering them. And beneath that atmospheric relearning, the planet's rotation, its strange, backward, glacial spin wavers by fractions. Venus changes the length of its day unpredictably, as if the crust and atmosphere disagree on how the planet should turn. But disagreement, paradoxically, is a form of conversation. Systems that do not speak cannot disagree. Light flickers through the haze as a volcanic field appears below you, its warmth painting the landscape in faint glows. Not eruptions, only lingering exhalations. But even these exhalations mean the mantle is pushing and the crust is permitting. Two layers, briefly cooperating after ages of estrangement. A small collapse pit comes into view, its edges so sharply defined that the rock cannot be old. A recent melt, a recent drain, a recent settling. If Venus were truly petrified, nothing here would look so clean. Fresh collapse means fresh voids. Fresh voids mean molten reservoirs. Molten reservoirs mean ongoing energy. It is nothing like Earth's volcanic vitality, but it is not nothing. You travel across a region of overlapping arcs, fractures, bending and rhythmic loops, responding to something deeper. They resemble tide lines left by an ocean the planet no longer has. The metaphor is strange but fitting. The mantle is behaving like a tide beneath stone, rising and falling so slowly it might take 10 million years to finish a single breath. Even so, the crust curves to meet it. Patterns emerge, lines align, gradients form, heat localizes, atmospheric cycles repeat. Venus is learning structure, not the structure it once had, not the structure Earth has, but a new structure, improvised from fragments of competing eras. A hybrid identity. This planet will never return to what it was. It is not rebuilding its past. It is building something beyond it. Lightning crackles in the high clouds, illuminating sulfuric curtains in short, soundless flashes. These storms pulse in periods that match the subtle atmospheric cycles below. Thunder you will never hear echoes across altitudes you will never reach. But each pulse is a sign that energy is concentrating energy, that once dispersed evenly in dull, uniform heat is now gathering into patterns with coherence. Coherence is the seed of memory. And memory, proper memory, may be the first step toward transformation. Far beneath the storms, the surface folds slightly along a boundary you can barely see. It's not a plate, not a fault line, not a continent. It is simply a place where the crust seems willing to act together, even briefly, under the same force. A coordinated bow, a planetary nod. Then, unexpectedly, a channel cuts through the scene narrow, delicate, the remnant of lava that once flowed in a controlled direction, rather than in chaotic sheets. The channel's shape contradicts surrounding terrain, but this contradiction feels different. It feels intentional. It feels like the planet tested a pathway and succeeded, however briefly. In choosing direction, instead of dissolving into randomness, the idea grows quietly. Venus is not drifting into chaos. Venus is drifting into order. A new order. One we have never seen. The planes lift again, this time more strongly. A swell large enough to suggest a plume nearly ready to breach. It hasn't yet. The crust still holds. But it holds less confidently now. And the plume pushes with a firmness that tells you, the planet is gathering courage. Not human courage, thermodynamic courage. The courage of a system ready to resolve its contradictions in the only language it has: heat and motion. You rise through the clouds once more, letting the entire hemisphere fill your view. In this softened glow, Venus no longer looks like a dead world or a ruined Earth. It looks suspended, poised, held at the midpoint between two identities. The one it remembers in broken signals, and the one it has not yet claimed. Some worlds evolve, some collapse, but some, like Venus, enter a long interval between the two. An interval in which the past is unusable, and the future has not yet chosen a shape. A planet in liminality. Slowly, the realization settles. The next transformation will not resemble the last. It will not be a global melting, or a continent swallowing overturn, or an atmospheric runaway. It will be something quieter. A reorganization born not from catastrophe, but from accumulation, heat gathering, stress coordinating, atmosphere cycling, mantle insisting, crust bending, rotation drifting. A world preparing. And somewhere inside this preparation, hidden beneath layers of pressure and fire, lies the faint outline of the next Venus. A version not yet real, but already alive in possibility. If the planet rewrites itself again, what fragments will it keep? Which patterns will survive? Which memories, however broken, will guide the new world that rises? The clouds dim into deeper gold. The surface glows softly beneath. And the whisper that closes the long descent comes gently, almost like an exhale. Sometimes a world must lose its history to discover what else it can become. And Venus, in its quiet, heated dreaming, has only just begun to remember the shape of its next beginning.